Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, August 21st. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 685 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll be joined by Omar Zahzah, author of Terms of Servitude, a groundbreaking new book documenting how digital platforms and tech companies based in the United States support Israeli settler colonialism and genocide. Ali will take us through the latest developments in the case of Tom Alexandrovich, a senior Israeli cyber warfare official arrested by Las Vegas police for pedophilia, but allowed to flee the U.S. Later on in the program, Jon will cover the latest resistance news from across Gaza, including operations in Jabalia, Shujaiya, and Khan Yunis, as well as a multi-stage ambush in the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood of southern Gaza City. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Israel has killed at least 400 Palestinians and injured nearly 2,700. Between August 13th and August 20th, according to official records from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. The Israeli army has been obliterating entire city blocks in Gaza City and other areas in northern Gaza, as Palestinian children, men, and women starve to death, and as Israeli forces and American mercenaries continue to trap and kill starving Palestinians seeking meager amounts of food. According to the health ministry, 22 people were killed and 49 were injured at so-called aid distribution sites on Wednesday alone, bringing the total recorded number to 2,018 killed and 14,950 injured since May 27th, when the U.S.-led Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began its lethal operations. As part of its intention to fully invade, occupy, and destroy Gaza City, the Israeli army has intensified its attacks on 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood, with continuous airstrikes, artillery shelling, and gunfire. These attacks have resulted in the mass slaughter of Palestinian families and massive destruction of buildings and public facilities, the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights stated on Wednesday. The commission added that, quote, hundreds of families have been forced to flee, including many children, people with disabilities, and older people with nowhere safe to go amid dire humanitarian conditions, while others reportedly remain trapped, completely cut off from food, water, and medicine supplies. Over 2 weeks, the UN recorded at least 54 attacks on residential buildings and entire blocks in Gaza City, killing entire families in airstrikes and shelling. Attacks were also recorded on shelters of forcibly displaced people, including tents and schools. These figures, the UN says, quote, represent only a portion of the true toll due to underreporting in such dire circumstances. They indicate that the systematic destruction of Gaza City is already underway. Euromed Human Rights Monitor has reported that Israeli occupation forces have been using remote-controlled vehicles packed with explosives to destroy buildings in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in order to force Palestinians out of their homes and shelters. The army has flattened approximately 400 homes with explosive-laden robots and aerial bombardment, Euromed stated. Quote, this wide-scale military operation mirrors similar assaults in Rafah, Khan Yunis, and northern Gaza, aimed at obliterating entire communities and forcibly displacing all who remain. Launched on August 11th, the operation represents Israel's ongoing push to assume total and unlawful control over Gaza City. The intent is to evacuate long-standing residents and up to 1 million displaced individuals, most having fled northern Gaza, and confine them to isolated, small areas in the south. Drones, specifically quadcopters, are being deployed to encircle residential blocks and coerce civilians into fleeing under armed threat, the human rights group adds. Maha Husseini, a researcher with Euromed, stated on August 17th that, quote, Israel managed to exterminate most of Gaza's journalists, Today, it is carrying out an obliteration campaign against Gaza's largest neighborhood, Zaytun, under almost no media coverage. The Palestinian Civil Defense warned this week that their rescue workers are unable to reach or treat the dead and wounded in Zaytun, and the residents of Gaza City have nowhere else to go. Approximately 50,000 Palestinians are in Zaytun, and rescuers can't protect its residents as Israeli forces annihilate the city. Quote, "We are living under extremely harsh conditions in Gaza City with no means of survival. The people of Gaza have no option left but death," the spokesperson for the civil defense stated. That was in Zaytun, Gaza City, this week. Other areas in Gaza City and northern Gaza have been destroyed in escalating Israeli attacks. In the Tufah neighborhood on August 17th, reporter Mahmoud al-Awaidia documented the widespread devastation left behind by the Israeli army. Quote, "There is massive destruction as far as the eye can see," he says, as the camera pans around an entire landscape of rubble, including the remains, he says, of the Al-Mahata Mosque. As Israel's mass destruction of Gaza City accelerates, so does its policies of forced displacement and expulsion. Satellite images released this week show the emptying of tent shelters, at least 132 buildings destroyed, and 58 Israeli military vehicles, including 17 bulldozers, moving into the city, Sky News reported. Al Jazeera English's Hani Mahmoud said on Wednesday that, quote, "More people are now receiving phone calls from the Israeli military warning them not to be in areas where they've lived all their lives and threatening them that they're going to be in the line of fire if they stay in these areas, asking them to leave as soon as possible, giving them just a little window of time. People are leaving behind their belongings," he said, including whatever food supplies they managed to obtain in the past few weeks. Tarek Abu Azoum, also with Al Jazeera, said on August 19th that, quote, "There has been a huge focus by the Israeli army on targeting the eastern portions of Gaza City, destroying the civilian infrastructure and dismantling the civilian fabric there. Some families have moved to other parts of Gaza and started to set up tents close to the coast. There are also huge portions of Gaza City residents determined to live close to their communities and homes, even as attacks continue to unfold in other parts of the Gaza Strip." Our contributor, Asim Al-Nabih, who is also the spokesperson for the Gaza municipality in Gaza City, posted to social media that, quote, "The idea of losing Gaza forever has driven people here to madness. They would rather die than be torn from it. They would rather be killed literally on Gaza's land than see our city turned into nothing more than a memory. We are the ones who know this city best. We are its people, its children, its lovers, its rightful keepers. We have carried its stones in our hands, breathed its sea breeze, felt both its tenderness and its harshness. We have lived its beauty, its longing, its wounds. No one belongs to Gaza more than we do. So leave us, just leave it to us. Let us be the ones to grieve it. Let us be the ones to weep for its martyrs. But leave us here, just leave us here." That was from Asim Al-Nabih, writing from Gaza City. Meanwhile, Western and regional states continue to send lethal airdropped parcels of food aid instead of forcing Israel to open the crossings to the thousands of aid trucks that remain blocked or, at best, trickled in. On August 17th, an airdropped aid package killed an elderly Palestinian man in southern Gaza. Saber al-Zamili, 75 years old, was inside a tent when the package fell directly on him, according to his family. He was preparing to head to the mosque for his daily prayers, his son told the publication Middle East Eye, and his daughter Sarah said his body was retrieved from beneath the package with severe injuries. Quote, "His entire body was broken," she said. The United Nations reported this week that only 47% of the 2,000 metric tons of food supplies required daily to meet basic humanitarian food assistance needs has been allowed to enter Gaza. Starvation in Gaza is at the worst level since October 2023, and what has entered is insufficient to meet even the minimum caloric intake needs, the UN stated. Included in the limited quantities of food are mainly dry goods. However, the risk of spoilage and infestation of food supplies has drastically increased due to being stranded for months, heat, and impending expiration dates. Furthermore, the UN notes cooking gas has not entered Gaza for over 5 months, and firewood has become increasingly unaffordable, forcing many to use waste and scrap wood as alternative cooking sources, exacerbating health and environmental risks. Since the beginning of August, the children's fund UNICEF says it was able to deliver limited amounts of therapeutic food for acutely malnourished children, as well as infant formula for just 1,200 babies. But children and adults alike are continuing to die of starvation. Since March, nearly 100,000 children have been under the age of 5 have been screened by UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. This week, UNRWA reported that in less than 6 months, child malnutrition has tripled across the Gaza Strip, and in Gaza City, nearly 1 in every 3 children is now malnourished, 6 times higher than before Israel broke the so-called ceasefire in mid-March. The Gaza Government Media Office stated on August 17th that the ongoing prevention of allowing meat, fish, dairy products, fresh produce, and other basic foods is part of its policy of deliberate starvation. Quote, even if a few trucks enter in very limited quantities, the occupation deliberately leaves these trucks vulnerable to looting by its affiliates, prevents their safe arrival to those entitled to them, and even kills anyone who attempts to secure these trucks, the media office said. On Wednesday, August 20th, the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza recorded 3 new deaths from starvation and malnutrition, bringing the total number to 269 recorded deaths by starvation, including 112 children. Speaking to the Electronic Intifada podcast this week, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 explained that forced and sustained starvation is shaving years off of Palestinians' lives, especially children, whose cognitive and growth development is dependent on good nutrition in their earliest stages. Quote, every day that passes that they are under these conditions of malnourishment, especially the severe ones, you are gambling with their future. They have cognitive issues that will develop as a result of this that will be irreversible, Ahmed noted. Children's immune systems will be irrevocably weaker, he says, adding that children will have shorter statures and developmental delays, not reaching the classic milestones that we see kids reach, even crawling and then walking, or then speaking. All of these things get delayed, he says. They get pushed back because of what's being inflicted on them. For more, watch or listen to What Does Israel's Starvation of Gaza Do to the Human Body on electronicintifada.net. Israeli and American mercenary forces operating the private so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites continue to trap, injure, and kill starving Palestinians, including children, every day. Defense for Children International Palestine released a report this week documenting 2 separate incidents in July, where Palestinian children were shot and injured by the Israeli military while trying to obtain food from aid distribution areas as part of Israel's ongoing genocidal campaign against Palestinians. 15-year-old Mohammed al-Houaiti told the children's rights group, quote, while I was in the waiting area by Wadi Gaza Bridge, we were monitored by an Israeli quadcopter. We waited there for half an hour for the aid delivery gate to open. As soon as the gate opened, we rushed towards the gate when 5 Israeli tanks appeared and opened fire directly at us, resulting in numerous martyrs and injuries. I am an orphan, having lost both my parents. I have to go to the American aid point in Netzarim to obtain food for my 8 siblings and myself, Mohammed said. DCIP says that Israeli forces targeted a group of starving Palestinians on July 27, 2025, while they made their way to the U.S.-registered Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid station at the Netzarim corridor in central Gaza to collect food and supplies. This tragic incident led to the loss of 18 lives, including 2 children, and left 10 others injured, also including 2 children, among them Muhammad. He says, quote, "I was struck in the head by an expanding bullet. For an hour, I remained under fire from the Israeli army, bleeding profusely. The aid gate finally opened at 11:30 a.m. After that, I crawled and stumbled, barely conscious, until I reached the Nuseirat intersection," Muhammad added. The Center for Constitutional Rights in New York, meanwhile, filed a lawsuit seeking records from the Trump administration over its funding of the private U.S.-registered Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The lawsuit comes on the heels of the legal group's official notification in June to the GHF, warning of its potential legal liability for complicity in Israel's war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide against Palestinians. The lawsuit also follows the Trump administration's failure to comply with the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA request submitted last month. The lawsuit, filed on August 20th, seeks records that could shed light on not only the decision-making process behind the $30 million grant it received from the USAID, which was approved by the U.S. State Department, but also on the creation of GHF, its funding, and how it plans to use the grant. The Center for Constitutional Rights says it is particularly interested in information that could reveal whether the administration's distribution of funds has any links to President Trump's Gaza Riviera plan, which would cleanse the area of Palestinians and redevelop it for investors. Quote, "GHF's militarized aid distribution model, which it designed in close coordination with the Israeli occupying power, is more suited to furthering the genocide than to providing much-needed humanitarian relief to a starved Palestinian population," said Ayla Kadah, attorney and justice fellow at the Center for Constitutional Rights. Rather than take action to prevent GHF's ongoing contribution to war crimes, the U.S. government has provided it with a $30 million grant, bypassing even its baseline vetting processes. This shocks the conscience, and Americans deserve to know how their taxpayer dollars are being used to further this dangerous dimension of Israel's genocidal project. Israel attacked a hospital again this week as laboratories and clinics face a steady decrease in basic supplies. On Friday, August 15th, the Israeli army bombed Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah, killing 2 Palestinians. The Gaza government media office said that the attack targeted a tent for displaced people within the walls of the hospital's courtyard near the outpatient clinic. It was the 13th time since the beginning of the genocide that the hospital was bombed. At Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, sewage overflowed into clinics on August 14th, forcing the hospital to temporarily stop its services. Dr. Atef Al-Hout, the hospital's director, stated that the flooding could not be fixed without coordination with Israel, as the source of the sewage leak is located in a no-go zone designated by the Israeli military and closed to Palestinians. Because of the 22 months of widespread destruction of infrastructure to sewage lines and pumps, doctors say that waterborne diseases are skyrocketing. Dr. Munir al-Bursh, the Director General of the Health Ministry in Gaza, said that around 170 patients every day are brought into Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital with the parasitic infection Giardia as a result of people resorting to drinking contaminated water, especially as the summer temperatures rise. Al-Bursh also said this week that hospital beds are at 300% occupancy, quote, "an unprecedented figure that reflects the scale of the health and humanitarian catastrophe we are experiencing today." Compounding the health crisis, the health ministry reported this week that 49% of laboratory testing materials are completely out of stock. 51% of laboratory consumables and supplies are out of stock. Many basic tests in operating rooms and intensive care units have run out or are about to run out. Excuse me. Most of the materials needed to check blood levels for patients who have undergone kidney and liver transplants have run out. Complete blood count or CBC testing materials, which are the basic test for visitors to healthcare facilities, are about to run out, and what is available is sufficient for only a limited number of days. Materials for testing blood units for viral infections are sufficient for only a few more days as well, posing a risk of unsafe blood transfusions. Blood bags and blood transfusion kits are only sufficient for less than a month from now, and approximately 45% of laboratory equipment has been damaged or destroyed and requires maintenance and spare parts. A journalist was killed this week, Islam El-Komi, who worked as a reporter and content creator for different media platforms, was killed along with his son when Israel bombed their tent in Gaza City on August 19th. The Gaza government media office said that with El-Komi's killing, the number of journalists and media workers murdered since October 2023 has risen to 239. Following the hunting and targeted assassinations by the Israeli military of 6 reporters on August 10th, including Anas al-Sharif and Mohammed Kureka, Gaza journalist Saleh al-Jafarawi is now being threatened by Israel. On August 14th, al-Jafarawi said that the spokesperson for the Israeli army, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, along with other military and Hebrew media figures, has put a target on his back. Quote, "You either live as you want or you live as they want," he says. "You live with your head held up high, broadcasting both audio and video. We will not kneel to them, God willing. I won't hide from you. Saleh might be the next martyr, or it could be one of my colleagues who will be the next martyr. We could all be subjected to what Anas and our colleagues were subjected to," he said. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight I Envy My Dead Best Friend by journalist and English graduate Khaled Al-Kershali, writing from Gaza City. Khaled writes about his best friend Mohammed Hammo, who was killed by Israel in November 2023. Hammo was a contributor to the Electronic Intifada. Quote, "My tears for Mohammed have decreased recently. I stopped worrying for him, not because my grief has lessened or because I feel any relief at his absence or because my love for him has faded, but I stopped worrying simply because I know with certainty that Mohammed is in a better place. I even feel jealous of him, may he rest in peace, and I wish I was him. Mohammed was not displaced several times or forced to cook over a wood fire, surviving on scant amounts of water and sleeping without a blanket. He had not gone to the Netzarim or Rafah aid distribution points, where hundreds of starving people seeking food have been killed by the Israeli army. He did not wait hours for a bag of flour at an aid site only to get nothing. He did not go to bed hungry for days, feeling himself starved to death. He was not forced to drink salty or contaminated water. He was not left to wander with nowhere to shelter. I consider Mohammed to be the luckiest, as he did not spend the last 2 years of his life in fear as bombs shook the ground beneath him. He did not have to mourn and bury his loved ones one by one until none were left. Mohammed himself was never buried. His body still lies beneath the rubble, with no grave I can visit, even if the war were to end. But I visit him every day. He is always with me, alive in my mind, and as long as we, his friends, remember him, Mohammed will live on." Those are excerpts from I Envy My Dead Best Friend by Khaled Al-Kershali, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine. 2 days before his brother Mohammed was killed with Anas al-Sharif in Gaza City, photographer Ibrahim Nofal filmed a group of music students practicing their instruments in a tent shelter. He says, quote, "In a place drowning in grief, Gaza's children have chosen music as a form of therapy and a symbol of resilience. between the tents and in the middle of war. It's crazy, right? We're dying. We sacrifice martyrs, dying of hunger. Life is almost non-existent, but there are people with hope in art, in something very beautiful that happens in the tents. This is the music school among the tents. Students learn the oud, the flute, the tabla, and the guitar. This is real resilience, he says.
بين الخيام وفي نص الحرب إشي جنوني. صح احنا بنموت، نقدم شهداء، ميتين من الجوع، الحياة معدومة تقريبا، ولكن في ناس لسه في عندها أمل، في فن، في إشي كثير جميل بيصير بين الخيام. هاي مدرسة موسيقى بين الخيام. طلابي بيتعلموا عود، بيتعلموا على الناي، بيتعلموا على الطبلة، بيتعلموا على الجيتار. هذا الصمود الحقيقي.
And a group of kids were filmed playing with a parachute that was dropped with food parcels over Gaza. Ahmed Al-Kilani, a photographer who captured the scene, said, quote, "Gaza kids turn a parachute into joy, simple happiness despite the pain." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you.
I know.
We're out of words, but yeah. I've been trying to check in as regularly as I can with many of our writers, our friends, our colleagues in Gaza. And I got a message from one of them, Abdullah, this morning, and he said, I just want to share it. He said, "We're still hanging on to life, fighting the daily struggles of securing food and water for the family, searching for the slightest sense of hope or positivity, even if it's fake, so our minds and hearts wouldn't give up in the midst of this insufferable horror and misery." And he said that it's so great that people around the world are learning the truth about the situation and starting to speak out about the horrors of the occupation. So just another reminder that it's us speaking up, going out, protesting. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. That is providing people in Gaza with that sustenance to make it from day to day. So I want to thank everyone who's still doing that and encourage you to keep going.
Yeah, now is not the time to give up. Absolutely. Well, we have a packed show today. Of course, there's a lot of news from the resistance front, which John will get into a little bit later. You've been following the threads of this absolutely bonkers story about an Israeli cybersecurity expert who was caught.
A government official. Government official.
Right. Working directly under Netanyahu, who was caught in a pedophilia sting and then was allowed to leave the country and go back to the colony. So, but first, there's a lot happening in terms of uncovering, revealing, and challenging the Silicon Valley's hand in this genocide, providing Israel with the tech that it is using to surveil and hunt Palestinians in Gaza. Ali, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yes, with pleasure. And just a reminder that you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. Over the last several days, workers at Microsoft, joined by community members and former Microsoft workers, have set up an encampment outside the US tech giant's headquarters to protest its complicity in Israel's ongoing genocide. Let's take a look at a video of those protests shared by the campaign group No Azure for Apartheid.
Today, we answer Gaza's call to action. Our liberated zone is established out of desperation, urgency, and grief. We grieve alongside Palestinian mothers who have had to bury their starved children.
Thousands of Gazans have been killed as a result of the current iterations of Israel. Israel's ongoing Nakba.
Nas al-Sharif, this is my will and final message.
Same point of egress will be straight ahead over the bridge.
And regular viewers will recall that we interviewed several former and current Microsoft employees involved in this campaign in May, and they told us about the ways the company assists Israel's genocide, including by providing its Azure cloud services to the Israeli military. Campaigners say those protests and disruptions will continue until Microsoft ends its complicity. Microsoft is taking note of the growing unrest over its complicity. Last week, the company announced that it is commissioning an external review of allegations published by The Guardian that the Israeli military is using its Azure cloud service, quote, for the storage of data files of phone calls obtained through broad or mass surveillance of civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. Microsoft said that its standard terms of service prohibit this type of usage and that the review is to be conducted by an outside law firm. But the August 15th statement also says, quote, in recent months, we've heard concerns from our employees and the public about media reports regarding Microsoft's Azure and AI technologies being used by the Israeli military to target civilians or cause harm in the conflict in Gaza. In response, we have conducted an internal review and engaged an external firm to undertake additional fact-finding to help us assess these issues. Based on these reviews, we've found no evidence to date that Microsoft's Azure and AI technologies have been used to target or harm people in the conflict in Gaza. The No Azure for Apartheid campaign has not been impressed, calling Microsoft's announcement of the new external inquiry, quote, yet another tactic to delay the immediate cessation of ties with the Israeli military. The group reaffirmed that there is no ethical, moral, or compliant way to sell technology to an army on trial for genocide led by war criminals wanted by the International Criminal Court. Now, Microsoft is one of several US big tech firms deeply intertwined with Israel, and they include Google, Amazon, Dell, and Meta, among others. Our guest today is someone who follows the role of big tech in this genocide closely. He is Omar Zahzah, Assistant Professor of Arab, Muslim, Ethnicities, and Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State University. I'm also proud to say he is a regular contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and his most recent article, published in July, revealed previously unknown details about Dell's extensive ties to the Israeli military during this genocide. Omar is the author of Terms of Servitude, a groundbreaking book published by Seven Stories Press, documenting how digital platforms and tech companies based in the United States support Israeli settler colonialism and genocide through active collaboration and censorship. It's available for pre-order now and will be released next month. Omar, welcome to the Electronic Intifada live stream and congratulations on the publication of Terms of Servitude. I read the whole book yesterday. I sat down and read it cover to cover. It's really an incredible book, and you deserve real congratulations on this achievement, especially trying to remain focused on writing a book amid this genocide, which, as you say in the book itself, was an extremely difficult task to do emotionally and practically. So really, it's an incredible achievement.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here with you all.
Mabruk, Omar.
Thanks, Omar. Let's start by getting your reaction to the protest by Microsoft workers that we just saw and the company's announcement of an inquiry, and put this in the context of the resistance by workers in other big tech firms that you write about in Terms of Servitude.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, what the Microsoft workers, what this campaign is doing is exactly what's needed, because I think all of us, and I don't just mean Palestinians or even just supporters of the Palestinian struggle, but all of us in this current global order are in a lot of danger, because we're under a state of affairs right now where basically these big tech companies can move with relative impunity, right? We don't have a lot of levers of pressure. They're in all aspects of life, from political to civic, and they're aware of the outsized hegemony that they are practicing. And so what we're seeing now, where these inevitable revelations about complicity in Palestinian colonialism and genocide come to light, is that the price of that hegemony is exactly that we don't have a lot of mechanisms of accountability. And so what we need is direct action by workers like this. We need people calling out these companies, doing it in ways that are uncomfortable, that are unpredictable, and that make as much noise as possible, because otherwise everything is going to go back to the kind of complacent corporate euphemism of these, faux accountability reports, like what you just read a few minutes ago, right? Where the companies launch their own investigations, absolve themselves of all wrongdoings. And so this is exactly the type of action that we need, and we need a lot more of it. And I commend these workers and all others in campaigns, including the No Tech for Apartheid campaign, who are showing us the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Turning to your book, a key concept in terms of servitude is what you call digital settler colonialism. Can you explain what that is and how it helps us analyze the role of big tech in Israel's efforts to erase Palestinians physically and virtually?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And so in the book, I use the term digital settler colonialism, and I'm upfront about the fact that I'm not the first person to do it. Typically, it's used in a way where the digital sphere becomes an extension of physical processes of colonization. But the way that I used it, I wanted to make clear that we're seeing a colonial weaponization of digital platforms in order to continue the Zionist process of colonizing, expelling, and ultimately eliminating Palestinian life and Palestinian presence. But the way that I tweak this a little bit is that I make clear to stress that what we're experiencing is a result of direct collusion and collaboration. So that these companies, these big tech companies, I look, for example, at Meta, I talk about Google, and others, they are willingly choosing to partner with Israeli colonialism and apartheid. This is an active choice on their part to facilitate this process, right? It's not inevitable. It's not something that we have no means of stopping. And so I wanted to kind of repurpose that term to emphasize that aspect of collusion, so that we see that this is a result of direct choices being made that can be reversed, that can be overturned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we speak to you right now, Omar, there are people watching us on YouTube, which is owned by Google, Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, Twitter or X, which is owned by Elon Musk, and Facebook, which is owned by Meta, which is controlled by Mark Zuckerberg. And we are constantly aware that anything we might say could fall afoul of these corporations' so-called community standards or community guidelines or terms of service. And of course, the title of your book, Terms of Servitude, is a play on that phrase, terms of service. In fact, the Electronic Intifada has repeatedly been censored by various platforms, including having videos arbitrarily removed by YouTube. In your book, you call these community guidelines and terms of service weapons of colonial erasure. What do you mean by that? Talk about who makes these rules and how they're enforced.
So simply put, I'm arguing that these so-called terms of service, these so-called community standards, are weapons of colonial erasure precisely because they're being levied in such a way as to silence rightful, legitimate protest and advocacy for Palestine, or often even merely documentation of Israeli colonial atrocities from their platforms. They're designed by the companies themselves, so there's very little accountability in terms of who actually is able to make much of a difference in terms of getting these processes reversed. Now, individuals can petition companies. They can say, I believe my content was falsely removed, and you can go through an entire labyrinthine process. But oftentimes it's not a guarantee you're going to get your post back. And when you do, the damage is often already done. you've lost the momentum of the moment. You may have sacrificed a lot of views. And so, in a sense, even with the retroactive restoration, what's happening is that the most necessary impact that the post would have been able to have has already been taken away. And this has become so routinized and so mechanized that I believe it's important to think about these things, not just as a kind of banal sort of risk of navigating the digital sphere, but they're actually an entrenched strategy for silencing and stifling political dissent and critique. And I think it's interesting that if we think back, for example, to say 2021, when we started to see uprisings for 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, as you all have reported on, as I'm sure your viewers will remember, it was kind of a revelation that we started to see these companies come forward and say, we're not really mass censoring, it's just a glitch. But since that time, and this is what I get into in the book, this has become so standard at this point that we've sort of reached this impasse where I think a lot of us are aware that these companies are lying. They're aware that what they're saying is not satisfactory, but they're also aware, that we're sort of held hostage to their platforms because they're so entrenched in everything. They know that, we don't have a lot of options in terms of other places to turn to. And I mean, this is the importance of, Cory Doctorow talks about in crapification, not sure if I can use the actual term on this platform, right? But this idea that the companies willingly make decisions that are deleterious for their users under full awareness that we are kind of held hostage to them and we don't have much else to do. But in this case, in addition to this political censorship, I'm arguing that these policies, these often non-explanatory, non-helpful policies really are their own tools of colonial erasure, precisely because they're so quotidian and yet they're so insidious at the same time in how they silence.
You talk about, just elaborate a little bit, you talk about a number of platforms over recent years, recent times, starting to include the word Zionism as one you can't say. That if you criticize Zionism in certain contexts, not in every context, they will consider that a violation. They will consider that discrimination against Jews. And you give the example of one platform, Twitch, which we said was, which, as I noted, is owned by Amazon. Actually, last week during our live stream, Twitch took us offline and they claimed that we had violated one of their rules. And while we were online, we lodged an appeal. Very quickly, went online and lodged an appeal. And within minutes, we got a reply, or by the time the show ended, we got a reply telling us, oh, we're sorry, we made a mistake. We've put your channel back up. They actually took down our channel. But by that time, our live stream had been canceled, had been removed. We lost viewers, but then they put it back and they said it was a mistake. But they never told us in that initial notice what they claim our violation was. And again, as I said, they put it back and they said it was a mistake. When I read your book yesterday, I reflected on that because in the book you talk about how they often claim these things are mistakes. What do you read into that? And talk again about how they're addressing the term Zionism now as a potential violation.
So the application of, what some have referred to as, anti-Zionist policies, moderation policies. I mean, I think a lot of us are going to be familiar with this as a direct extension of what we've seen in other contexts of Palestine work, where there's this conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, right? This false conflation. And so what these companies do now is this very shrewd practice of claiming that they're concerned with, being vigilant about bigotry on their platforms. So exactly, they implement these policies that are restrictions around criticism of Zionism, and they say really only to make sure that Zionism is not being used as a proxy, for Jewish people. And of course, we've seen this. Actually, one of the companies I talk about in the book is Meta, but we've seen this multiple times from Meta, right, where you had campaigns from organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, the Facebook We Need to Talk campaign that I believe was in 2020, which was to prevent what is now Meta, right, from implementing a policy restricting criticism of Zionist and Zionism on its platforms. Well, since that time, now that has become a standard policy that was implemented, right? And again, of course, if you take the time to read them, there's these confusing, mealy-mouthed explanations about all of the different contexts under which they might censor use of the term Zionism, right? But of course, we know that this is not a good faith or transparent policy that's really rooted in, protecting their users. I mean, if these companies were concerned with protecting their users, we wouldn't see the mass censorship of Palestinians in times of genocide and even prior atrocities that have been playing out for years, right? We know that this is an attempt basically to capitulate to Zionism because these companies believe and know that this is what's best for their bottom line. But oftentimes they will, disguise these policies as trying to prevent anti-Semitism on their platforms. And then the, alibi of this being a mistake, it's, again, to get back to this kind of shrewd play, this kind of gives them the best of both worlds. If they can say, okay, we apologize, this was a mistake on our part, what they're actually doing is, it might seem like they're admitting fault, but actually they're affirming the strength of their platform. Because in this moment, they're saying, we're so vigilant, sometimes we just overstep a little bit because we really care about our users so much, right? So it's actually a way of kind of validating themselves. Secondly, it does let them off the hook because they don't really need to get into the mechanisms of how their censorship works, right? And oftentimes companies will practice kind of a twinned, sort of opaque strategy that combines a lot of algorithmic targeting with some cases where you have individual flagging as well, but they try to keep this very, very hidden in the shadows so we're not aware of it. But so the idea of being a mistake is a very clever ploy, because it ultimately lets them get themselves off the hook while patting themselves on the back and ultimately minimizing the accountability that they have to us as users who, let's be frank, are providing the direct content, that makes their platform so successful to begin with.
And if you could flesh that out even a little more in terms of the actual direct connections by Meta, Amazon, Google, to Israeli intelligence, to the military manufacturers. It's not just like ideological support of Israel's settler colonial violence and genocide of Gaza. But it is absolutely a financial tie as well. And then you have people on the board of these organizations or in top, executive positions who come from, Israeli intelligence, who come from the Israeli government. Can you talk a little bit about like these material connections to the Israeli state and how that fits into their policies on policing speech and censoring Palestinians?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you try to keep receipts of this, and then I think one of the importance of revelations like what we're seeing most recently about Microsoft, for example, is that you find that this is actually so entrenched that one kind of wonders where to start, and where it really stops. I mean, just thinking, for example, about how many veterans of 8200 are entrenched in the tech industry. And this is something that's also cynically used often as a branding ploy by big tech, right? But the numbers, I mean, I was just looking at DropSite News, for example. You see about 250 veterans in Microsoft. And then, of course, you have, in other multinational companies, NVIDIA, Meta, Google, Intel, Apple, and which often actively continue to employ veterans of that unit. On the boards of these companies, like Meta, you have people with direct, who are Israeli, right? And so this is also an important thing to think through, because I kind of relate this to thinking about the question of the lobby, right? We often have we talk about whether or not the Israeli lobby controls and dictates, U.S. media. And very quickly, I just want to note for the viewers that may not be aware, Unit 8200 is this shadowy cyber unit that is responsible for direct surveillance as well as creation of, the many of the fatal algorithmic AI targeting platforms that we're seeing unleashed in Gaza right now. So they're often compared to the NSA within the U.S. context. Just wanted to put that out there for those who may not be familiar. So there is a lot of Israeli entrenchment, in various capacities within big tech. But I also think, this is why I like to emphasize the question of collusion and collaboration, because we need to remind ourselves. I think we can kind of go down the rabbit hole of mapping all of these connections, and they are important to map. But we also need to be aware that this is a direct result of a choice that is made. These companies don't need to partner in the ways that they do. They don't need to go to one of the most elite repression units, of a colonial government in order to bolster their products. They choose to do this because it's the best for their bottom line, and because they know, or they believe, that maximal profits have no connection to the preservation of human rights. And so I do think there's a lot of material connection, and this is directly tied to profit. This explains why the companies orient themselves often in the way that they do, where Zionism is taken for granted, whereas Palestinian humanity is controversial, is something that is terrifying to them. And they create this cultural interaction and experience that really internalizes that, so that what started as the advantage to these platforms being the so-called exception to corporate media, they're recreating the internalized biases of corporate media and operationalizing that as practice. But again, I think we really need to remind ourselves of the fact that they are choosing to operate in the way that they do. There's nothing inevitable about this. There's nothing duplicitous or deceptive, in terms of them being deceived. They know what they are doing, and they're doing it to us, and they are doing it willingly.
And I just want to remind people, Omar, that during the 12-day war in June, which came after Israel launched its aggression on Iran, one of the targets Iran retaliated against was this Israeli cyber warfare base in Beersheba in the Naqab region. And of course, this was heavily censored in Israeli media. We reported on it. And this is a base, this is a major project designed by the Israeli army, the Israeli military, with a number of purposes. One, explicitly, is to settle the Naqab, the Negev desert, to bring Jews to the Negev by moving major military base and industries there. And then if you look at the list of tenants on this Israeli military base, you can see there it includes some of the firms we're talking about: Amazon, Apple, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Philips, Dell, Intel, NVIDIA. These are all Western firms, Motorola. And they all chose to locate their Israel offices, and others, European firms like Siemens and so on, Oracle.
Pfizer. Yeah.
And there at the bottom, you see the two logos, a little bit hard to see, but they are the logos of the Israeli Defense Ministry and the Israeli Prime Minister's office in this major multi-billion-dollar Israeli military project to combine Unit 8200 that you just talked about with these tech firms. So they made the choice to go there and be part of a military target which Iran struck during its war. So that's a very stark reminder of those material and organic ties and the choices that they've made. Yeah. So Omar, there's a fascinating quote in Terms of Servitude. It says, and I don't recall exactly who it's from, but it says, this is a quote: "There's this feeling Palestinians are going viral, but they're also somehow invisible at the same time." And I think we can all intuitively understand that. Please talk about how we can resolve the contradiction that these big tech firms are actively collaborating with Israel's erasure of Palestinians, while at the same time we're witnessing a live stream genocide through these same platforms. It's sort of a paradox that you address, but talk about it now.
It's a great question, and it's one that I still sit with, well after completing this book, precisely because it's the one that we're all living through. But one thing that definitely comes to mind is that we need to act on the difference that a raised consciousness is supposed to provide. And what I mean by that is there is a virality, there is an awareness, there's no undoing the awareness of what we're seeing right now is genocide, and only the latest genocide. There's no undoing the awareness of the fact that Palestinians are facing an horrendous and frankly inhuman level of oppression by a brutal and irredeemable colonial force. And so what needs to happen now is we need to continue acting out and disrupting in all of the ways that we can. At the very beginning, right after the latest genocide was unleashed, this apocalyptic hell was rained down on Palestinians. One of the things that, people would say at protests was there can be no business as usual under a genocide. I think a lot of us may have had some level of shock that not necessarily that things would continue on as usual, but that they would do so to the extent that they have. And I think part of it is for us to kind of not wake ourselves up, because I think we're awake, but to continue to wake others up and to continue to find points of pressure and agitate and continue to make that saying, that imperative that there can be no business as usual under a genocide a reality. And so continuing to do the next step from raising consciousness, whatever that looks like, whatever form it takes, I think that's the most important thing we can be doing in this moment. Because otherwise, I think the flip side of that is relapsing to despair and despondency, which will not help the struggle, will not help our movement, and which is frankly not what we're being called on to do by Palestinians in Gaza as well.
Omar, speaking of Palestinians in Gaza, in the book, you interview Asim An-Nabi. He's the engineer and writer in Gaza, a frequent contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and someone that we've been honored to host on this live stream. What did you learn from him and from people in Gaza more generally about the interplay between their lives and technology under Israel's siege for almost 2 decades? And now during almost 2 years of this ongoing Holocaust?
Well, I learned so much from Asim, but I think one thing that surprised me a little bit is that, when we began our interview and I told him, well, so I'm speaking about text suppression and the use of digital platforms to advance the Palestinian struggle. And at one point, he told me something to the effect of, we've won. And I found myself, being a little confused. And I said, well, what do you mean? Because here I was doing this interview at a time where there's this imposed famine, and honestly feeling horrible on some level, because I'm interviewing somebody who is going through this and having them give me their time to speak about what they're enduring, And he tells me, no, we've won. And I say, okay, well, what do you mean? He's like, no, we've used these platforms to raise consciousness. People know Palestine because of what we have done and what we in Gaza have done on many levels. And then, through talking to Asim, that was one of the most crucial interviews in really locking down the process by which Palestinians had very strategically taken to platforms like what we call it X now, but Twitter at the time, right? And done so with a very careful and sophisticated understanding of the conventions of narrative and kind of, cross-purposing these platforms to raise awareness about, Israeli strikes and things like that. Knowing when and how things would go viral, we said this was the process of many, many years. And so what we're seeing now is the result of decades of work by people in Gaza. So we have to thank everybody in Gaza, whoever took out their phone, right? And that really sat with me, that sense of no matter how dire things seem in the moment, whatever consciousness we have now really is the result of what Palestinians, on the ground have done. So that was a huge takeaway. And I also think it would be important to our conversation just to emphasize Asim's point that, oftentimes Palestinians in Gaza can be dehumanized. He says people just see us as, these suffering victims or these perfect victims, and they don't recognize that we have full lives. We're human beings, that we have joy, that we have not just resilience, not just resistance, but also our families, our friends, our loved ones, and we have this fullness that these representations often don't do justice to. And so I think that was really important to hear in the moment. And, I really thank Asim for sharing that with me. And I think one of the most important aspects of our work needs to be to continue to affirm that point as well.
Yeah, that was a really thought-provoking and moving chapter of the book, your conversation with Asim, including the conversation about how Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, who was, of course, murdered in the first months of this genocide, played such a huge role and in making this very deliberate effort for Palestinians to adopt these technologies and speak to the world, and how successful that has been. And really, that's ultimately why Israel murdered him, just as it is systematically murdering journalists in Gaza. It's murdering anyone who can bear witness or show others how to bear witness. So I just was so moved by the way you connected this to the reality of people in Gaza. I think it's often easy to speak in abstracts, particularly when we're talking about technology, and you really tied it to what's happening right now. We have one more question for you, but of course, I want you to feel free to add anything else you think that we should know or you want people to know about your book or about this topic. But my question really is that Terms of Servitude chronicles this very sobering reality of tech censorship and repression targeting Palestine and Palestinians. Yet at the same time, you are optimistic that this repression will not succeed. Talk about where that optimism comes from, and what are some of the ways you see people effectively fighting back, and what more should we be doing?
Yeah, I think we need to understand, I think, that whenever we're despairing or we're feeling that we're powerless or that there's nothing we can do, we need to ask ourselves, who does that feeling benefit? And I think I always find that helpful, because in these moments, it really reorients my understanding of the fact that companies, the Israeli colonial project, and the entities that support it, right, need us to feel powerless. They need us to think that there's nothing we can do. And so the optimism for me often comes from the fact that even if we just do one thing differently, right, we don't know what's going to happen next. Liberation never seems practical, right? It's the most radical undertaking of the application of one's imagination. And so if it's never felt practical, or it's never been a practical thing, because the so-called order of business as usual, the status quo, is based on dispossession and extraction, then we need to have faith in the fact that the things that seem the most impossible can become reality. And so for me, that's where the optimism comes from. The another level of it is there wouldn't be so much time and infrastructure and energy and resources put into censorship if we weren't making a difference. If Palestinians, who are resisting on all levels, were not making a difference and don't continue to make a difference, right? I think we can also get very cynical, and we should, about the kinds of mealy mouth PR statement that we're getting from these companies that have become so routine, but they also wouldn't feel the need to do that if they weren't aware on some level that there's some level of public erosion of their image that these revelations can continue to unveil. So I think on a very basic level, we just need to keep reminding ourselves that it seems impossible because it's supposed to feel impossible, but we need to resist that feeling. And one of the things that I personally feel I've learned is that it takes all walks of life, it takes all positions, all institutions acting out in the ways that they know best. So, we need journalists, for example, to continue to do the kind of investigative reporting that we're seeing about big tech right now. We need organizers and activists to continue to do direct action and to make things as uncomfortable for these companies and all who supports the genocidal colonial Israeli regime, make them as uncomfortable as possible. We need people to continue teaching in spite of the censorship that has continued to ramp up in spite of the horrors of this current administration that is amplifying the criminalization we saw under the previous one. Let's not give Biden a pass there. Just doing whatever we can wherever we are. And I think the more of us that do that, the clearer it will feel that this is the only thing that we can be doing. So that kind of possibility of a compounded resilience, that's really what keeps me going. And that's what gives me optimism.
That really came through in the book. It's an incredibly well-researched book. It is also very personal as well as being very scholarly. So it was really a pleasure to read, even though we're talking about such horrifically difficult things. And so I really recommend it. And again, I congratulate you, Omar. You are, of course, an assistant professor at San Francisco State University. You are a regular contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and your articles, which you mention, and in fact, the book is based on, in part on some of them, which is really an honor for us to be a platform for this work. Your book is called Terms of Servitude. It is available for pre-order now from Seven Stories Press. It comes out next month. And we are looking forward to publishing more of your work at the Electronic Intifada and to this conversation, to which your book is such an important contribution. And this struggle, we're looking forward to that continuing. Thank you so much, Omar, and we wish you continued success with all your work.
Thank you so much, Ali and Nora. And
Thank you.
Always. Thank you.
Compounding resilience. I think that's something that many of us listening to this will now kind of add to our lexicon. Things we need to keep in mind. So thank you for all the work that you do. And Mabruk again on this book. I'm very lucky I got a real physical copy. So thank you.
I don't have my physical copy yet, but I'm going to be ordering it.
Yes.
We're working to get them out as fast as possible.
Good. Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you both.
Thanks. Oh, so good. So proud of the work that he's done and continues to do. And this is remarkable.
Omar is so thoughtful. And again, of course, he has articles going on the Electronic Intifada going back, I believe, to 2021. And the most recent one is about Dell, as we a scoop about Dell, which we noted earlier and talked about earlier. And again, I think it's so impressive that Omar was able to write this book about fast-moving events to be able to sort of set yourself apart from the immediacy enough to write a necessary book like this is really impressive. So it's just really well done to him.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you for that. And Ali, you've been at first reluctantly, but now you're all in, 10 toes in, as the kids say, following the threads of this story coming out of Las Vegas that the corporate legacy media really hasn't touched, and you'll get into why. Tell us about what you've been tracking.
Yes, and just a reminder that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm going to talk about a story I wrote about earlier this week, one that a lot of people are talking about right now. It's the story about Tom Alexandrovich, a senior official in Israel's National Cyber Directorate, an electronic warfare unit that works directly under the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Alexandrovich was visiting the United States to attend several cyber security conferences on behalf of the Israeli government. Alexandrovich is reportedly the main architect of Israel's so-called Cyber Iron Dome, and he's the head of the defense division at the National Cyber Directorate. So that gives you a sense of his importance in Israel. But while he was in Las Vegas earlier this month, he was arrested in a child sex predator sting. On August 15th, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police announced that it had arrested 8 child sex predators in a multi-agency sting involving local, state, and federal authorities, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. This operation was conducted as part of the ongoing efforts to reduce violent crime and protect children in our community, the police said. They identified Alexandrovich, who's 38, as one of the suspects who were arrested and taken to the Henderson Detention Center on felony charges. Alexandrovich is charged with attempting to lure a person he thought was a 15-year-old girl for sex and then going to meet her. That's when he was arrested. I'll come back to this in a bit when we look at the arrest report. But this is a serious felony carrying up to 10 years in prison and has a minimum sentence of 1 year. And in fact, I was able to find news reports of people being sentenced to the full 10 years on this same charge. What happened next, though, is causing a lot of controversy, and I think it's heightened by the lingering concern over a Trump administration cover-up over Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile sex trafficker. We published a piece by Jim DeBross last month headlined, "U.S. Media Barely Touches Epstein Links with Israeli Intelligence." As the headline indicates, it's about how even with all the reporting on Epstein and all the attention, the considerable amount of evidence about his ties to Israel and its intelligence agencies is being ignored by mainstream media. But let's get back to Tom Alexandrovich. He was arrested, charged, then immediately bailed out of prison and flew out of the United States back to Israel. That's significant because Israel is known as a haven for Jewish pedophiles and sex criminals because it rarely extradites them back to the United States, or it delays such extraditions for many years. You can see a couple of stories about that here. Here's a CBS headline from 2020, "How Jewish American Pedophiles Hide from Justice in Israel." And here's another one from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz in 2022, "How Foreign Sex Offenders Find Refuge in Israel." Alexandrovich's next court date is set for August 27th. Is he going to show up? That's the question. This is causing outrage among at least a handful of supporters of President Trump. Here's Republican Congressman Thomas Massie posting yesterday on Twitter X about the Alexandrovich case. Massie shared a story from the website Axios with the headline, "MAGA erupts after Israeli official charged in child sex ring flees US." But as you can see, Massie offers a correction suggesting that Alexandrovich was allowed to flee. In other words, that someone helped him to get away. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, another far-right member of Congress, has made similar points. She posted this extraordinary tweet criticizing the Trump administration for 2 recent decisions related to children. The first is its decision to stop issuing visas for Palestinian children injured in the genocide in Gaza to come to the US for medical treatment. She writes, "When did America's heart grow so cold to refuse innocent children privately funded surgeries, and then they return home after they recover? Wouldn't we allow Israeli children, if they were the ones needing surgery, or war-torn children from any other country?" And then the other decision she criticizes, of course, is related to Alexandrovich. And she says, "The most concerning question is when and how did America become so subservient to Israel that we immediately release a child sex predator after arrest with a 100% locked up case with evidence and let him off to fly back home to Israel?" So what do US government officials and officials in Nevada, the state where Alexandrovich was arrested, saying about this? There appears to be a concerted effort to put forward the image that nothing unusual is going on here. On Monday, the US State Department posted the following statement on Twitter, X, quote, "The Department of State is aware that Tom Alexandrovich, an Israeli citizen, was arrested in Las Vegas and given a court date for charges related to soliciting sex electronically from a minor. He did not claim diplomatic immunity and was released by a state judge pending a court date. Any claims that the US government intervened are false." Israel also downplayed the matter, confirming when the news broke earlier this week that Alexandrovich had returned home and asserting that it had no diplomatic implications. And here's a story published just this morning in the Nevada Independent, a nonprofit publication. The headline is, "How an Israeli child sex predator was able to bail out of Nevada jail without breaking the law." And it says, Clark County District Attorney Steve Wilson, who is responsible for prosecuting the case against Alexandrovich, told the Nevada Independent that the, quote, "handling of this case was extremely typical." So nothing to see here, according to Wolfson. The story adds, "When it comes to allowing the release of a person charged with a crime before a trial, courts in Nevada are required to impose the least restrictive means necessary to protect the safety of the community and ensure a person appears in court. Except under special circumstances, courts allow standard bail for people charged with a crime before they're brought before a judge on criminal charges, meaning the amount of money required to leave detention is preset by the court and requires no additional release conditions," end quote. Now, the article also states this, and this is important, keep it in mind, quote, "After posting bail the day after he was charged, Alexandrovich returned to Israel. Foreign nationals are often deemed a flight risk in criminal cases, but Wolfson," that's the Clark County prosecutor, "said that law enforcement didn't raise any red flags that would lead the office or police to believe that Alexandrovich was either a flight risk or danger to the community," end quote. The Nevada Independent article also quotes one of Alexandrovich's defense attorneys, a lawyer called David Chesnoff. And it says that Chesnoff confirmed via text message that his client will attend all court dates he is required to be at. In another statement, he said the bail process used in the case was routine. "I have been a practicing attorney in Nevada for 45 years and have seen our bail system work effectively throughout my career, and nothing happened here that was out of the ordinary," Chesnoff said. So we've just heard from Steve Wolfson, the Clark County District Attorney who is prosecuting the case, and the defense attorney for Alexandrovich, telling us that there's nothing amiss here, nothing to see, everything is perfectly normal. These two men are supposed to be on opposite sides, right? Prosecution and defense. Well, it turns out that Chesnoff, the defense attorney, is a huge campaign contributor to Wolfson, the prosecutor. Chesnoff's wife, and Chesnoff's law partner, Richard Schoenfeld, who is also representing the Israeli official, Tom Alexandrovich, gave a total of $35,000 in campaign contributions to Steve Wolfson's election campaign for district attorney in 2021. And you see a headline here from the Nevada Current: "Justice Not Blind in Clark County District Attorney's Office," says Wolfson's primary opponent. The story from the Nevada Current, and there are similar stories in other publications, reports that Wolfson also revealed huge campaign contributions from a casino magnate called Steve Wynn, who was accused by former employees of sexual harassment, coercion, indecent exposure, and rape. The Nevada Current reported that, quote, Wynn, according to the Wall Street Journal, paid a $7.5 million settlement to end a civil suit filed by a manicurist who says Wynn impregnated her during a rape, end quote. And that report adds, Nevada law has no statute of limitations to bring rape charges when the suspect is identified by DNA evidence and or a police report is filed within 20 years of the alleged incident. But Wolfson, again, that's the prosecutor, has made no effort to bring charges against Wynn and continues to accept Wynn's contributions. The same article also talks about the case of billionaire drug defendant Henry Nicholas and his companion Ashley Fargo, found in a Las Vegas hotel with enough drugs to warrant trafficking charges under previous standards. And that sparked a chorus of allegations that justice is for sale in Clark County. Nicholas and Fargo were allowed to plead on a relatively minor charge and make a contribution to charity to resolve the case. Guess who the lawyer was? The same David Chesnoff, who is now representing Israeli government official and accused pedophile Tom Alexandrovich. Both defense attorney Chesnoff and prosecutor Wolfson appear to be very friendly towards Israel. After October 7th, Chesnoff flew to Israel to volunteer for several weeks because, as he told the Las Vegas Review-Journal, quote, I went with a purpose in mind to try to volunteer to help in any way I could. He reportedly worked at the Sheba Medical Center to prepare supplies, and he said military personnel would come to the hospital to pick up supplies they would use to treat soldiers in the field. Chesnoff said that the most satisfying part was knowing that his work was helping those soldiers, according to the Las Vegas Journal-Review. Of course, the Las Vegas Journal-Review does not say that those soldiers were busy carrying out a genocide. And in 2024, Chesnoff received something called the Las Vegas Scopus Award, presented by American Friends of the Hebrew University. The event was held at the Encore at Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas. That's a hotel owned by his client, the accused rapist Steve Wynn. According to a press release from American Friends of the Hebrew University, among local government dignitaries there were Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo and Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson. Wolfson actually appeared in a tribute video to Chesnoff at that event where he said, quote, I think David deserves this award for the many, many ways he contributes. A lot of people talk the talk, but David walks the walk. He's a great humanitarian. So all in all, how likely do we think it is that Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson is going to aggressively prosecute David Chesnoff's client, the Israeli official and accused pedophile Tom Alexandrovich? We will see. Now, let's take a look at the arrest report for Tom Alexandrovich, which was obtained and published by the outlet Breaking Points. This is the report by the Las Vegas police officer who arrested Alexandrovich, and it describes in detail how an undercover officer, a decoy, posing as a 15-year-old girl, chatted with Alexandrovich online, and that Alexandrovich made arrangements to come and meet her for sex and discussed bringing a condom with him. Alexandrovich also allegedly sent photographs of himself to the decoy, thinking it was a 15-year-old girl. All the chats and communications were recorded, so presumably the police have very solid evidence, which is typical in these kinds of stings. According to the police report, Alexandrovich showed up at the prearranged location thinking he was going to meet the child, and that's when he was arrested and taken for questioning. He was read his Miranda rights, meaning he was advised he did not have to speak to the police and could call a lawyer, but he chose to speak to the police, and the report says that the interrogation was recorded by audio and video, which is again standard practice. Now let's get into what the police report says about that interrogation. The report states that the post-arrest interrogation was done by Department of Homeland Security investigator Tyson A. Walsh and FBI Special Agent Larissa Montes. Their names are blanked out in the report published by Breaking Points, but the redaction was not done correctly, so you can easily see their names. Now, keep in mind, these are federal agents, agents of the US government, not local law enforcement. And as is typical in these cases, the report states that Alexandrovich's mobile phone was seized and, as the report says, transported to the area command, where it was later secured as evidence pending a search warrant. Bizarrely, Alexandrovich, who is supposedly one of Israel's top cyber defense planners, told the interrogators that his phone was secured only by a thumbprint. If that is true, it shows a shocking lack of operational security. And ironically, many US law enforcement agencies in cases like this use Israeli software, typically from a company called Cellbrite, to crack cell phones. Will they be able to get into Alexandrovich's phone, and what else might they find? Now, the police report says that Department of Homeland Security agent Tyler Walsh, quote, advised Alexandrovich that due to being from Israel, the Israeli consulate could be notified, and that Alexandrovich agreed that the Israeli consulate should be notified about his arrest. So they knew right away that he was from Israel. The report goes on, quote, Alexandrovich is from Israel and is visiting for the Black Hat Conference, works for the Israeli government agency, and has so for approximately 14 years. So again, immediately, Alexandrovich told the US government investigators that he works for the Israeli government. The report continues. Alexandrovich stated he has a meeting with the NSA tomorrow and had met several bureau people and NSA people over the past week. Alexandrovich described the bureau agents as one white guy who was tall and a bald guy and one black guy. The bureau here appears to be the FBI. So again, Alexandrovich immediately informed the US government investigators that he was having meetings with the US National Security Agency and the FBI as part of his work for the Israeli government. So this is not a normal criminal suspect. And federal agents knew that as soon as he was arrested. But it gets worse. The report says, quote, Alexandrovich questioned how much bail would cost and why he was under arrest. And then it says that Agent Walsh advised Alexandrovich he would be transported to jail while under arrest due to the chats with being with a girl of the age of 15 and their communication of sex and a condom. What did Alexandrovich say? According to the report, he stated he was in shock and he needed to contact someone about his international flight back to Israel. Alexandrovich stated he did not know the numbers for the Israeli government. Alexandrovich stated his family was in Israel. So immediately, he told US federal investigators of his intent to flee, that he is an obvious flight risk, and that he's trying to get back to Israel as soon as possible. And the police report quotes him saying, it says, Alexandrovich stated it was very important he get numbers for his flight. He stated his flight is on Friday to New York and then will fly to Israel. So they knew his intent to flee immediately. Not local prosecutors, not the Las Vegas Police Department, but agents of the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. And then at the end of the report is the probable cause statement from the Las Vegas police officer who wrote the report, a police officer called Mark 𝐓𝐿𝐻𝐿. And he says, due to the aforementioned facts and circumstances, I determined that based on the undercover communications made using Pure and later WhatsApp with phone number, it's redacted, in addition to the fact that Alexandrovich did indeed arrive at the aforementioned location and that he matched the depiction of the subject in communication with the decoy juvenile based on the images of the subject obtained while he engaged in that communication by the decoy juvenile, that Alexandrovich was the same person in contact with the online covert employee during the aforementioned communication. Using a mobile device, Alexandrovich also admitted to having been engaged in the aforementioned communications with the decoy juvenile as articulated under the summary of his interview. Due to the aforementioned facts and circumstances, I have determined that Alexandrovich did commit the offense of luring a minor using technology, a violation of Nevada Revised Code 2015604A, a felony. Alexandrovich was subsequently transported to the Henderson Detention Center and booked accordingly. So what we take away from this is that federal agents of the FBI and DHS knew they were dealing with a high-level Israeli government employee who claimed to have been meeting with NSA and FBI officials in previous days in relation to his work for the Israeli government. They also knew he intended to flee the United States as soon as possible. Now, let's go back to that report from the Nevada Independent, quoting Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson. After posting bail the day after he was charged, Alexandrovich returned to Israel. Foreign nationals are often deemed a flight risk in criminal cases, but Wolfson said that law enforcement didn't raise any red flags that would lead the office or police to believe that Alexandrovich was either a flight risk or a danger to the community. Well, if that's true, the question is why? The feds knew who he was immediately, and the feds let him go. Before this turned into a massive scandal, there was a clear effort by federal officials to downplay it. I already mentioned the State Department, but I also want to point out that one of those officials, crucially, was the acting U.S. attorney for Nevada, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. She's the top prosecutor for the federal government in the state of Nevada, representing the U.S. Justice Department. On Monday, she confirmed that Alexandrovich was arrested in what she called an important multi-agency operation that targeted child sex predators who preyed upon the most vulnerable members of our communities. As a result of the operation, the Clark County District Attorney's Office is handling the prosecution, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said. Now, this signaled clearly to me that the federal government was washing its hands of the matter, leaving Alexandrovich to be prosecuted at the state level by District Attorney Wolfson, who is accused of giving sweetheart deals or failing to prosecute the wealthy and powerful clients of attorneys like David Chesnoff, who make campaign contributions to him. That, of course, is the same Chesnoff who is now representing accused pedophile Israeli government official Tom Alexandrovich. The U.S. Department of Justice can and does file federal charges in cases like this, especially when federal agencies are involved in a sting, as they were in this case, but for some reason chose not to do so in this case. Will we ever find out why? A federal prosecution would, of course, carry much more force, especially if Alexandrovich refuses to return from Israel to the U.S., because then it becomes a U.S. government matter, not just a state or local county matter. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 is not a typical U.S. government official. She is an Israeli-born lawyer who has been politically active with Zionist organizations, including the Israeli American Council, a lobby group funded by pro-Israel tycoons Adam Milstein and Sheldon and Miriam Adelson. In fact, she made her Israeliness a central part of her failed election campaign for Nevada Attorney General before she was appointed to her current position as U.S. Attorney by Donald Trump. Last month, more than 100 retired judges signed a letter objecting to President Trump's appointment of 𝐓𝐡𝐞, calling her unqualified and citing her well-documented history of racist remarks, conspiracy theories, and threats of violence. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has previously called for Israel to wipe Gaza off the map and labeled the entire population their terrorists and animals. and there's just so many vile genocidal tweets on her personal account. But once this story broke, she deleted her personal account with those statements. But I have copies of them, and I posted some of them on Twitter X. Now, once Alexandrovich's return to Israel started to attract attention and criticism, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 tried to shift the blame, and she posted another statement from her official US government account. She wrote, quote, "A liberal district attorney and state court judge in Nevada failed to require an alleged child molester to surrender his passport, which allowed him to flee our country. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, just called me outraged, and she also called the FBI Director, Kash Patel. The individual who fled our country should have had his passport seized by the state authorities. He must be returned immediately to face justice." Steve Wolfson, the district attorney in Nevada that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 appears to be referring to, hit back at her, calling her comments proof of her unfitness to serve as US attorney. So now these two are publicly squabbling. But remember that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is the top federal prosecutor, and as soon as Alexandrovich was arrested, he was interrogated by federal agents from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, who knew exactly who he was. She had and still has the power to file federal charges against Alexandrovich and demand Israel return him. But how likely is that to happen? I already mentioned that Israel is a notorious haven for Jewish sex offenders because it rarely extradites them back to the US or to other countries. And there is now new reporting from independent journalist Jack Paulson and Harrison Berger. They report on a major leak within Israel's Justice Ministry that reveals over 2,100 international legal requests, including multiple US extradition cases for child sex abuse suspects that Israel delayed or ignored. Berger states, quote, "The leaks show the delayed or failed attempts of the US Department of Justice to extradite various sex abusers from Israel where they had fled to evade justice." So what are the chances that Israel will extradite one of its top cyber warfare officials back to the US to face justice? And what are the chances that the Trump administration and prosecutors like Steve Wolfson, Sigal Shattar, and Attorney General Pam Bondi will insist that it does? And while Israel publicly played down the matter, that's not how the Israeli government sees the issue at home. As I reported in my article earlier this week, senior Israeli officials have convened an under-the-radar committee to examine how to minimize any potential fallout to US-Israeli relations and intelligence cooperation from the affair. That's according to Israeli media. By the way, there has been no reporting on this in US mainstream media. There has been some in local Las Vegas media and in foreign media, but at least as of a few hours ago, I found nothing in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So it seems that Israeli impunity extends not just to the mass murder of Palestinian children in Gaza, but to crimes targeting children in the United States as well.
Talk about a rabbit hole. Thank you for doing that. And I expect that this is going to be one of those stories that is going to keep you up at night, Ali.
It already has.
I'm sure.
A lot of hours went into this, and I should point out that our colleague Michael Brown helped me greatly and did enormously important research to help with this report.
Yeah, it's just disgusting and atrocious, and it's very shocking, but also not surprising when we know what Israelis can get away with. And
and I mean, at this point, there isn't even the pretense of due process or rule of law in the United States. So it's will we ever get answers from the FBI? I mean, this guy was arrested. They knew right away. They said we're going to inform the Israeli consulate.
Yeah.
which is his right under the Vienna Convention, but they're going to tell the Israeli government right away. He said he works for the Israeli government. He said he'd been meeting with the US federal agents in recent days about his work with the Israeli government. This isn't just some criminal suspect, a local guy that you pick up. This is a case where there would immediately be phone calls to FBI, Homeland Security headquarters, to the Justice Department, to the US Attorney to say, what do we do? What do we do with this guy? And the fact that he was just allowed to walk out of there, and that the district attorney who's supposed to be prosecuting him is saying, oh, everything was done properly in this case, is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you and I'm sorry for having to do all that work on this just depraved, disgusting story. But you'll keep us posted, of course. Thank you for that, Ali. Let's bring Jon on for some different tempo of news.
Yeah, but great show. Omar was. I'm definitely going to order that book for sure.
Yeah, it's really, really good. A lot has happened in Gaza this week. Even up till, way past your deadline yesterday, there was a full day of unprecedented actions by the resistance. Give us a sense of what you're going to be covering.
Yeah, well, the battle in Zaytun that you covered so well in the newscast that people should check out. And yeah, an operation in Khan Yunis, again, another large-scale platoon-size raid attempting to capture Israeli soldiers in their defensive positions in Khan Yunis. So we'll get into that. And there's operations from 𝐄𝐥𝐿 that we got after the Israelis withdrew from that area in the recent days. So we're going to cover all the way across Gaza today. Nobody's going to be left out.
Excellent. All right, we'll take it away, Jon.
All right, let's do it. All right, so you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 685 of Israel's criminal genocide. I am reporting this on the 21st of August. We will start with the maps because we are going to take a look today all across Gaza. You can see these are still the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs mapping that were used. The purple is the shoot to kill zones. The white areas are the areas where people are living in tents. And some buildings remain in Deir al-Balah in the middle camps area. And of course, Israel is planning on invading Gaza City as part of this expanding Operation Gideon's Chariots. They couldn't decide on the name because previous weeks, as listeners and watchers of this program know, we quoted many times Israeli military officials saying that Gideon's Chariots operation that began on May 19th was over. But now they just decided last night that they're going to be calling the Gaza City invasion Gideon's Chariots B, Part B. So what we have been watching for the last 3 months, I guess, is Gideon Chariots A. So the Israeli military released some figures about that operation just yesterday. The operation that effectively began in March when Israel reneged on the ceasefire agreement that was guaranteed by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. Israel reneged on the agreement, which was a multi-phased agreement, and Israel pulled out of that, leaving their captives in Gaza, who they have repeatedly proven don't matter at all. And this Gaza City invasion will be the final straw of that for those captives. But Israel has not achieved any of its military goals in Gaza that were clearly articulated. Return the captives through violence, destroy the Qassam brigades, destroy the government capacity in the Gaza Strip, and make Gaza no longer a threat. Those were their stated goals of the war, and they've achieved none of them. And so they're just continuing to fight. And this plan for Gaza City involved the call up of 130,000 reservists to fight. There's talk of it being a 14 brigade combat operation, which is a significant operation, upwards of 5 divisions participating in the battle in Gaza City. And based on the notices that were given out to soldiers for the reservists, some of them went out this week. That operation will begin. It was supposed to begin. It was planned to begin October 7th, but Netanyahu's trying to push that date up. The reservists are going to be called in 3 waves that begin at the beginning of September. So we'll have to track how that goes. Looking at this map, just to say, the purple is the shoot to kill zone. It's not the zone that Israel controls, because when they were bragging about this, they released a statement the other day that talked about there has been 10,000 airstrikes by the Israeli Air Force jets, helicopters, and drones since March 18th, since they collapsed the ceasefire. 10,000 airstrikes. The Gaza Health Ministry in that period of time has said that upwards of 11,000 Palestinians have been killed in that period. And Israel says Gideon's Chariot's goal was to capture 75% of the Gaza Strip. That is simply an absurd and not serious statistic. And the blue area, the purple area on this map is not Israeli control. They do not have operational control in those areas, as we're going to see today on the program. But there's nothing like that. They largely withdrew from Beit Lahia. People went back to Beit Lahia this week and saw, for example, Kamal Adwan Hospital completely destroyed. People yesterday managed to get back into the Tufa neighborhood in Gaza City, in eastern Gaza City. And the mass area of Khan Yunis that you see down at the bottom of that map is not controlled by the Israelis. They're operating mainly within the 2 corridors that they created. We will show a closer map when we get to that point. But just wanted to say 10,000 airstrikes, that's what the Israelis are talking about, and that is how their field reports read. They're very, very proud of that. But of course, as Nora reported, and we've reported on this show a number of times, the Israelis are also using all kinds of other weaponry. Artillery doesn't count in those. Tank fire doesn't count in those. And they're using the M113 robot vehicle-borne IEDs, creating essentially a tank car bomb that they've been using in increasing numbers, particularly over the last week or two. Maybe we'll get into those and how they work on a future show, but today's show's packed, so we will move forward with that. We're going to start in the north, so we take a look at this northern Gaza map that was this is an Electronic Intifada original. Thanks to Maxwell for these maps. They've been useful throughout the whole war. You can see the Netzarim corridor there, and you can see the Zaytun neighborhood. It abuts the Netzarim corridor. And that has been the target of a surprise operation this week. It was unannounced operation. The Israeli military didn't say it was happening until 6 days into the operation. But immediately we saw the resistance hit them as soon as they came into that neighborhood. And in terms of the reservists, the call up is right now, the immediate call up is 60,000 reservists. that will add to and create 130,000 called up for this operation. Like I said, 12 to 14 brigade level teams to participate in the Gaza invasion. This 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation is not directly connected to that Gaza City invasion, but it's a preliminary operation that is a 2-brigade operation in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, destroying hundreds of buildings. And the shortage of fighters, which we've been talking about on this show for months now, and the Israeli media talks about every day, particularly Army Radio is very attuned to this, with the soldiers all constantly complaining about being overworked. I'm going to read you just word for word an Army Radio report from Monday morning. Due to the shortages of soldiers, the IDF is considering reaching out to Jewish communities in the diaspora to encourage and recruit Jewish youths from abroad to its ranks. The shortage of soldiers, estimated to be around 12,000 missing from the IDF ranks, and the non-enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox are leading the army to try to exhaust every other possibility to replenish its ranks. This morning, we published, this is Army Radio, word for word, that the IDF intends to approach the large Jewish communities in the diaspora, aiming to encourage recruitment of Jewish youth of enlistment age who will come to the country for a few years to serve in the IDF. According to the work done by the Personnel Directorate on the subject, the recruitment potential among 18 to 25-year-olds in large Jewish communities is more than 10,000. So that can find their they can replace their killed and seriously wounded soldiers that have been taken off the battlefield, in the number about 10,000. Senior IDF officials tell us at Army Radio the target we intend to set is an increase of about 600 to 700 additional soldiers each year from Jewish communities abroad. The main communities that effort will focus on are the United States and France. And I'm reporting this from Canada and can almost assure you Canada will be involved in those too. So looking at this map that we have on screen here, we're going to be focusing today on 𝐓𝐡𝐞. We're going to show operations from Shujaiya and Tufa, as well as Jabalia. And the Jabalia camp is to the north of Jabalia there, and Beit Lahia is in the upper left corner, across from, adjacent to Beit Hanun, which has been turned into a moonscape. And the invasion of Gaza City is unclear exactly how this operation will take place. When it took place the first time, Israel said that they conquered Gaza and had operational control of it back in 2023 and early 2024. The attack came from the south. They came along the corridor and up through Tel Hawa, and also came down the coast on the western coast side from Beit Lahia down through into the beach refugee camp. And the Shati camp is the beach refugee camp. Shati put up significant resistance and held back the Israelis on their push into Gaza City. They did that with 3 full divisions at that time, and they believe they need more than that because people are not taking their call-up orders. We know from the beginning of Gideon's Chariots that at one point Army Radio was reporting on missing soldiers numbering more than half of who were supposed to come back. So we're going to start in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 because that's where this operation began this week. You're seeing here a Nukba commander. He is setting up this operation, saying that this comes in light of the escalating threats of the enemy towards our people and our beloved territory. We tell them slowly and clearly, you need to understand, we are here. We are in front of you, behind you, and everywhere. And what we're looking at here is these soldiers, that's Nukba force, has surveillance cameras, they have maps, they have drone footage that you can see that's overlaid on top. And this is a surprise operation. And they're showing you now an Israeli position under, they've got the 2 armored troop carriers there. And the commander says that we know this battle is difficult. Here you can see the troop leading procedures. They have each hill marked out on the target buildings. You can see where the Yassin archers are going to be positioned, 1 with a thermobaric warhead to hit the troops, 2 with Yassin 105s for the Namr troop carriers, and also the guerrilla action devices that they are going to take and hand deliver to the Namr troop carriers that you see there. This is one of 14 operations in Zaytun this week, targeting with Yassins, 10 IEDs, and 12 artillery ops. So high quality operations immediately greeting the invasion. And this is a Nukba force, the elite commando force of the Qassam brigades. You can see they're on top of a massive map there with detail. So they're matching the layers, the surveillance, the mapping, the troop leading procedures, the predicting of Israeli positions. They have guessed right that the Israelis will take up this building. And as you'll see in the videos that come up, there's not very many other buildings. But then they also successfully predict the route that the Israelis will withdraw from, and they have Yassin archers on the reinforcements. So just a remarkably detailed operation that we've been seeing all throughout the war. But this one in Zaytun is remarkable because the Israelis, this is a secret invasion. They didn't announce it. And this operation is 24 hours after the Israelis entered Zaytun. So let's take a look at number 3, because there's a detail here that I've been tracking, and I promised you I'd keep my eye on this. And if you look in the upper right corner there, you see the 2 guerrilla action devices. They're called the Bark, the lightning bolt. They are a small shuad, a lighter shuad that could be carried easier, that could be thrown. This is an adaptation that Qassam has made manufacturing in the field. I pointed it out to you guys in Jabalia when we first saw it. We saw it from the drone footage when the fighter ran up and threw it on top of the Merkava tank in Jabalia. Then we saw it in Khan Yunis, where it was thrown into the hatch after the fighter climbed up on the top of the Namr troop carrier and put it into the hatch. So we're seeing a new weapon here, because this is now in Zaytun. So now we're seeing them now across Gaza. These weapons didn't exist before. They didn't exist in this battle or before. And the canisters that you're looking at there on the right-hand side of the screen, those are not the same size canisters as any previous Shawad. The explosively formed penetrator that the Qassam Brigades builds has had a number of iterations, like a dozen of them over the years, going back to 2006, where they've been perfecting the weapon. And none of the canisters of any other versions match that. So we're looking at manufacturing canisters in Gaza right now, filling them presumably with unexploded Israeli ordnance, and deploying them on the battlefield, because the fighters realized that there was a gap in that they were able to get up close to these armored vehicles, and they were routinely seeing them with the hatch open. And this weapon is lighter, easier to carry. A fighter can carry 2 of them, and they can throw them. So they can throw them up onto the top of the tank. And this is an issue in Israel, because there is a heat wave in Gaza right now. And Israel 𝐓𝐿 reported in the paper yesterday, they had a piece on Namr troop carriers' air conditioning failures. The air conditioning failures meant that the cooling system in the Namr failed, and the interior temperature can reach 60 degrees or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So the soldiers pop the hatches open. I mean, we've seen them pop the hatches in the winter too. But yeah, so Qassam has adapted to the battlefield conditions and manufactured a new weapon in the course of the war. The Namr troop carriers, it was said by the IDF directorate, weapons directorate yesterday, that these vehicles, the tanks and the armored personnel carriers, have clocked 1 million kilometers of service inside the Gaza Strip in the past 2 years. So it's a malfunction of the air conditioners that creates a situation for these weapons to be used. And they quote an officer in the field: "Forces in the field have an impossible decision: disable a vehicle and halt operations due to logistical challenges, or operate against guidelines. Many commanders choose to proceed with operations despite the challenging and the danger." This officer says, "We're not allowed to enter buildings because they're booby-trapped, and we can't enter the APCs because the systems don't work. So what are we supposed to do?" The officer asks. "We're not asking for luxuries. But these are basic needs for fighting in the summer. And I wanted to put this in because this points to the fact that their machinery, if they were not being constantly resupplied by the Americans every single day virtually, that this war could straight up not happen. Because when those vehicles are taken off the field for whatever reason, because they're destroyed by the resistance, mobility killed by the resistance, or their air conditioners don't work, they are taken off the battlefield. And if they cannot be replaced by American shipments, this genocide would not continue. And so I just wanted to make that point. Let's look at the execution of this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation, because this is all one video. I just chopped it up so that we could understand it better. So there's the two guerrilla action devices, and you can see the Yasin 105 there. There you can see the Yasin 105 thermobaric warhead. This fighter here in his 𝐄𝐥𝐿 shirt is going to have the two guerrilla action devices. And just like we saw on the piece of paper in the troop leading procedures, these fighters are advancing from these mounds. They know the way to go to get to this building using the mounds. And now we're going to see him right under, in those windows up there are two Israeli soldiers, both on scope. They're both on their gun. And this fighter is climbed right up. They apparently don't see him until maybe this moment when one of the soldiers pulls back. But there's the thermobaric warhead. There's the detonation of the guerrilla action device, the BARC, exploding on the Namur troop carrier underneath the eyes of the soldiers. And this operation has been planned so well that the second force comes in. So we're going to see this here one more time. You watch the way that they move from hill to hill as they go here from undercover. Now they're going to move to the first block. And these are all planned in this operation 24 hours after the Israelis arrived there. And this is a Nukba elite commando operation. So they've predicted which building is going to be used, which look at the landscape. It's not that hard to pick which building is going to be used, but they guessed right. And they were prepared for this operation to hit the Israelis, as there's the two soldiers in the window looking out, and the fighter is right underneath the window, ready to throw his device. He's going to try to throw it into the Namur troop carrier through the open hole. You can see it there. It detonates. You could see the thermobaric warhead on the Yasin be pulled up into position to fire. And we can go to the next one after this, number five. Yeah, this is a continuation. There you see on the left side, there's the archer, Yasin archer, who's ready for reinforcements. He's providing cover. There's the fighters withdrawing. So they have the 𝐓𝐿 unit that has covering fire support for that squad to withdraw. And now these two guys are heading out to hit the reinforcements, predicting that the reinforcements will come on these two routes. And there he fires. And on this one, you'll see as well, this is the fighter is right beside the tank inside the house. If you look in the upper left, you'll see that was the first Yasin strike. And then this guy, you can see the tank helmet pointing out of the tank. He ducks down, but this fighter is spitting distance from the tank and blasts it directly through what would be the front door of the house, if that was there. We can go to the next clip. It's the same one to focus on this operation because it's pretty remarkable. He fires this one. And he looks like he hits the active protection system directly. He's aiming for the turret gap, which we've talked about all war, the weakest spot on the vehicle. But he fires in there, and you can see that tank comes along a route that was predicted, and the fighter is in that position ahead of time, ready. So really well organized operation, command and control, dozen fighters participating, Nukba commandos, and right away, as soon as the Israelis arrive in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, there hasn't been a formal operation in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 since before the ceasefire. So you're going back to 2024. But these fighters are in their positions ready to fight at any point. And so the first day that the Israelis roll in, the resistance is able to meet them. And we've seen that in every single location, because the resistance is organized in territorial defenses. And that's a really good example of it here in 𝐓𝐡𝐞. The next one, number 7, we're on now. Here's a return to sender operation, rewiring a Mark 80 series bomb. It's tough to tell exactly if that's a 2,000 pound, might be a 1,000 pound bomb. Repurposing it here and detonating it against Israeli armored vehicles. Possibly it was a bulldozer, but a bulldozer was definitely hit in one of these operations, because you're going to see after this significant explosion, because that's the bomb that the Israelis drop from the sky. That's how they get death tolls of 100,000 suspected, at least. There's the D9 being towed away. And then there's one more, another operation here, just a Yasin strike against a tank that is also part of this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation. The 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation began on Wednesday, and we have since then 14 Yasin strikes, 10 IEDs versus armored vehicles, and 11 artillery strikes just in that first days of the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation. We are going to go to Khan Yunis next, because we also have an active operation in Khan Yunis. I'm going to show you this map. You can see the Moreg route there. You don't see the Magan Oz corridor, but it comes along and meets around Salahdin Road that you can see running up, running from the south to the north. The corridor, the Magan Oz corridor, cuts eastern Khan Yunis from western Khan Yunis. And that's where this attack took place yesterday. The second capture operation attempt along these corridors. Previously on the Moreg corridor a couple weeks ago, I reported on the 12 fighters that came out of a tunnel and attempted to capture Israeli soldiers. The drones came and the fighters withdrew back down into the tunnel. All of them survived, returned to their base safely. And now we have an operation that was yesterday that was at least 20 fighters, a platoon-sized unit coming out in 3 waves to capture Israeli soldiers on the Magan Oz corridor. And these corridors are the corridors that Netanyahu said were existential to Israel's survival, these corridors. This is a base that has hit a forward operating base for the Israelis that was only established a couple of weeks ago. The 20-man platoon size unit, as I said, the fighters emerged from a tunnel 50 meters from the IDF forward base that was established a couple weeks ago. One unit goes, raids the base where the soldiers are sleeping. A second unit provides cover along the berms around the outside of the base. And a third team is an artillery team that will allow for the safe withdrawal of the troops. This is the Army radio report of the Israeli investigation into the attack. The attack was carried out by a squad of up to 20 fighters. They don't know. The reason why they don't know how many fighters there was, because as soon as the operation began, as soon as the fighters came out of the tunnel, they fired on the surveillance camera that they knew was there and took down Israel's surveillance camera. So the Israelis don't actually know any of these hard numbers, because the battle began before anyone had footage of what was happening, and a certain number of the fighters withdrew. So the position was on, as I said, the Magan Oz corridor or western Khan Yunis. The fighters emerged from a tunnel shaft 40 to 50 meters from the defensive position and split into 3 groups, says Army Radio. Beginning of the attack, the fighters fired at the observation camera and hit it, so the observation was less effective, and the Israeli soldiers only discovered the infiltration after the Qassam fighters were inside the Israeli base, and they have no idea. The fighters had tactical vests, Yassins, Shawads, guerrilla action devices, breaching charges to get into the building, and they were carrying stretchers, according to Army Radio, to return captured soldiers. And I said the IDF doesn't know how many were involved in the operation, because some withdrew before the Israelis even showed up. And this battle would have been a mess for the Israelis, but they got air support in time to prevent the full unit from being wiped out and the soldiers from being captured. That is just out this morning. I think we'll see if 𝐓𝐿𝐿 had cameras on that operation. We'll track this operation coming up and try to show you some visuals in the coming weeks on the show. But there was also a fresh operation in Khan Yunis this week, number 10. 13 artillery operations and 5 qualitative operations in Khan Yunis this week. So we can go to video number 10. Thank you. This is the stones of David's. This is David's stones. This is the defensive operation against Gideon's chariots. Here we have the fighter. He's quoting Muhammad al-Dayf, the chief of staff of the 𝐓𝐿𝐿 Brigade, saying, "We are here. I'm rooted in this land, and in it are thousands of seeds. No matter how the tyrants try to uproot us, the seeds will sprout. We will continue on this path, and we will not stop." You can see the fighters in tactical vests, and while they're talking here, the one fighter says, "No, look out the window! Look out the window! There's a D9," and they show that they're just right under the noses of these Israeli troops. And then you're going to see here an elevated Yasin strike targeting a tank that's behind that berm there that you can see at the top of the screen. Again, if you're not watching these videos, everything around is completely destroyed. The buildings that are standing are look like they could be pushed over by hand. But this operation is, you're going to see here, the Sadmia. This is a shock device detonate. It's going to blow the camera out of the cameraman's hands there. So we have a Yasin strike against the tank. Then we have the IED against the tank. Now we're watching the Yasin Archer reload and fire. And now we're going to watch them get away. And as they're going away, this fighter, masked fighter, says, "The men of 𝐓𝐿𝐿, the men of God, we are giants on the battlefield. We are only a few meters away from them, and we're going to show you." And they carried out the off. At the end, the masked fighter here is saying, "We say to the entire Islamic nation, God will not forgive those who abandon us, will not forgive those who left Gaza alone." Fighters on the front lines in Khan Yunis, able to carry out these operations. There's no operational control in Khan Yunis. Next one is number 11. This is 2 Yasin strikes versus the same Namr troop carrier. You're going to see 2 fighters here, one with a camera. Again, part of the difficulty of getting to them is getting through all the destruction. But there you see in the distance the 2 Namr troop carriers with their rear door facing the weakest point of the vehicle, fires direct hit. You see it from 2 cameras because the 2 fighters have 2 cameras. Now they're going to go back behind cover here and they're going to reload. You can see how easy it is to reload and put the rocket motor in to these Yasins, which have made them such an appropriate weapon for this battle. And again, just look at the destruction. There's just random pieces that were houses, just the uprights and supports of the building sitting there with the rebar sticking out. All of the buildings collapsed because when Israel failed at their military objectives, they have gone straight ahead on their objectives of making Gaza unlivable. So they're not going to win the war, but they're going to carry out this genocide that we've been watching in horror now for 685 days, because it began immediately on October 7th with serious attacks. Number 12 here. This is an interesting operation, artillery operation in Khan Yunis. You can see the fighters again, detailed maps. We're going to see in this one the use of drone footage to see where these land. A lot of times these operations, we don't get to see where the mortars land, but we know there's injuries from them. The Israelis admit to those from time to time. But here we can see an Israeli base. You can see the triangle. That's over a tank there. And that's a set of buildings that Israel has left. There's a moonscape around it, but there's 3 or 4 clustered buildings there that the Israelis are using as a base. And you can see by that footage, the drone footage, that those strikes are landing right inside the base. They're landing within feet with heavy mortars, 120 millimeter mortars, landing within feet of armored vehicles and Israeli troop positions. And these are joint operations that you're seeing happening here. So you see them tie their headbands. This is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 and the 𝐶ASSAM brigades. You're also going to see the Nasser Salahuddin Popular Resistance Committees in these operations multiple times. And these operations, there's the Nasser Salahuddin brigades, Popular Resistance Committees. These are 60 millimeter, 80 millimeter, and 120 millimeter mortars. 𝐶ASSAM has made these mortars since the disengagement. Even before that, they used them against the settlements inside Gaza. And these are Rajum 114 millimeters. These are also 𝐶ASSAM built rocket artillery system that you won't see anywhere else in the world. Now we're going to go back up north. So we'll take a quick look at that map again. So now we're going up to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 on the eastern side of Gaza City. Operational security had them hold back these videos, but they were released. These are from Gideon's Chariots, but so they weren't from this week, but the videos were released this week. So let's take a look at them. Number 14 we are at right now. The fighter says that we are the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 battalion and we are advancing on this Israeli position. You can see the fighters are ready. They've been ready in this position there. That is an Israeli position that you're looking at in that building. And here they're going to fire F7 North Korean fragmentation warheads that we've seen throughout the war, and anti-tank warheads. There's a FN mag machine gun possibly captured from the Israelis. There were FN mags in Gaza before the war, but we know that they've also captured them in the war. And again, this fighter's denoting that he's the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 battalion. And we're going to see here, we're going to see these strikes. We're going to see these again after as well, because I want to put the audio in so you could see, because these are 4 strikes hitting the tank and the D9 in here. Here's one against the tank. You can clearly see a direct hit. We're seeing that from multiple cameras. Again, you can see how easy it is to reload the Yasin, and he can move up here. And this is going to be against a D9 armored bulldozer. He's going to get a direct hit on the side cage. If that's not an automatic, and there's an armored troop carrier, that's going to be the final Yasin strike of this set of operations. But this next one has audio in, because I want you to hear the 4 Yasin strikes on the 2 vehicles, one after another. So just pretty remarkable timing and planning of that operation to make, that would make a mess of that D9. And you could see it burning with the first strike before it gets hit with the second strike. So again, organized operations. Let's look at number 16. This 16 took a bit of editing. This is a Dragunov SVD, Iranian SVD sniper operation. You can see the soldiers on the back of the tank there. I had to edit out the shooting, but you can see it creates a cook-off, hits the ammunition on the back of the Merkava tank there and creates a cook-off. So the ammo is burning. Maybe Tamara can throw my Twitter handle underneath there. All the uncensored videos are all archived on my Twitter handle. And the next one is also, if we go to 17, this also had to be edited because this is a direct hit on a tank commander who's coming out of the top of his hatch on his Merkava tank, and he was hit as well. So you can see the full video of that. That was just a short shot. So that's 17. So 18, we're at 18. One more here. You can see the soldier, his helmet there with the triangle. And then we have to match community guidelines for YouTube. He just disappears there. But you can imagine why he disappeared, and you can watch the full uncensored video on my 𝐄𝐥𝐿. So one more here. We have 19. 𝐓𝐴 put together a mixtape of their return to sender operations. You can see there's 𝐓𝐡𝐞, their EFP. There's the anti-tank mines. There is the unexploded Israeli U.S. supplied Israeli airdropped bomb. That's the 𝐓𝐡𝐞, the EFP. The fighter says, don't worry about your planes. And this is interesting here because this is actually, Trevor Ball identified this as actually an illumination round. So what they got this round that unexploded, but it's just for illumination. So 𝐓𝐴 has emptied the illumination filler in the weapon and refilled it with unexploded ordnance. So turned an illumination shell into an IED back into an artillery shell. So this mixtape is showing the various operations that took place by 𝐓𝐴 in Shujaia neighborhood. And there's the Mark 84 2,000-pound bomb. We saw that before, but they harvested it, and these detonations. This is kind of a best of that they're showing us here. And at the end of this video, you're going to see the M113 robot truck bombs, tank bombs that the Israelis have been using. Again, so this is from Shujaia. This would be from July. There's the tank operation that we saw in July as well, but they put this together with some new operations to show us the battle, the third battle of Shujaia that took place during Gideon's chariots, which is David's stones for the Palestinians. There you see the M113. That's what happens to the M113 after it's detonated. And they also show tracks from other vehicles that the resistance has destroyed. But the Israelis are using these robot bombs all over Gaza right now at really high frequency. There's only 4,000 of them that exist in their stores. The Americans gave them to them, and they are too thin for the modern battlefield. There's tracks from a different vehicle that was struck. So the M113s have been just turned into bombs, and they create massive explosions that take out whole blocks because they can be filled with explosives. So they become a much larger vessel to carry explosives than the bombs. There you see pieces of a bulldozer from the spoils of war, the leftovers that the Israelis didn't take, which we've seen them usually take. They drag the vehicles all the way home back to Israel. There's the inside of the M113 just completely emptied out after those blasts. So that is Shujaia. Let's move to Jabalia. Just a couple quick ones from Jabalia. Here we have a fighter. This is also from Gideon's chariots, David Stone's defense. So this is from weeks past, probably late July. These operations were executed. You can see the fighter mouse hole there. Now we see a Namur troop carrier. The troop carrier parks right outside the house, and there's a soldier that I've blurred out there. He exits. There's the three soldiers exiting out the back of the Namur troop carrier with the triangles. There's their sort of sloppy stack as they're about to enter this building. And the Qassam brigades have mouse holed right here. You can see a shawad through that mouse hole directly at those soldiers. So that is a devastating operation. The next one, and then they return to their base safely. Here we see them packing a shawad. Haven't seen this too often, but you can see Qassam packing this shawad and wiring it up during this operation. This is going to be targeting a D9 armored bulldozer. And one interesting thing about this is look at how many pressure plates they brought. Usually we see Saraya use one pressure plate, but Qassam is using here 3 or 4 pressure plates. So to increase the area that they cover for the vehicle to hit. So that's an interesting development that we are seeing here from Qassam that we don't usually see, using multiple to create the minefield. So there's multiple places to trip the minefield when they're burying these. And they're burying these EFPs, and now they're showing the destruction of the D9 bulldozer. You could see the the tracks from the vehicle and the what's it called? The shovel, the trowel, the shovel of the bulldozer there, like much bigger than a human. So operations in 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐄𝐿, successful operations in Jabalia, and these are held back because of operational security reasons. You know, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 video, we saw it pretty much the next day. The 𝐄𝐿 𝐄𝐿 one was also from the next day. And then just one more here. We have 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿 Central Brigade. I just wanted to bring this one into you because, actually, this is the last one in Jabalia. These are Iranian heavy mortars being fired in the battle in Jabalia. The one that comes up next is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿 in the central, in the middle camps. And I brought this one just because now this is every brigade fighting. So we saw from the far north to Gaza City. This is the middle camps, and we saw Khan Yunis. Rafah is completely ethnically cleansed and is a collaborator colony right now. No operations there, although there were mortar operations targeting Israeli positions in those areas. So you can see Saraya still has the ability to launch these rockets 685 days into the war. And we saw 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿 on last week's show. They had the rockets marked with manufactured in 2025. So they wanted you to see that they're manufacturing rockets at the moment. So pretty packed week for the resistance report and resistance operations heading into this brutal battle in Gaza City that Israel wants to ethnically cleanse 1 million people from Gaza City. No signs in any way, a sign of the resistance not being ready for what the Israelis have in store, because we're seeing it all across Gaza in stark relief this week. So that is the resistance report for day 685 of Israel's criminal genocidal war in Gaza.
Thank you, as always, John. Yeah, it was a very packed week. And I know there was a couple of questions from some of our viewers, and this one you've answered in the past, but it would be good to kind of re-up your analysis. Someone was asking, wouldn't the publication of these videos and the analysis of them actually help the Israeli army? Walk us through why it's not helping the Israeli army.
Oh, I mean, it may help the Israeli army, but it's released by the resistance, and they want these videos to be released. They want people to see what's going on. I mean, we know from early in the war when soldiers were in windows that it didn't seem like they were watching the videos because there was Israeli soldiers never seemed to learn to not stand in the windows. We saw them standing in the windows again in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 this week. But everything that I'm saying is coming from what's on the videos. I'm analyzing the videos. I'm picking up the details in the videos and explaining what we're seeing. But the resistance themselves, they handle the what is important to be hidden is hidden, and you can see that in the videos. Yeah. They blur certain things, they release them at certain times. There's all kinds of things that they do for operational security, but once it's on film, then it's part of the information operations that the Qassam brigades want to be published. And I assume that they want people to find these details and notice the meticulousness of their planning and documenting. And there's nothing the Israelis can do about anything that is being seen. It's them being defeated, but they know that the resistance has drones and Yassins and Shawads and tunnels, and they lie about the resistance being defeated, and these videos show that. And that's why the Nukba commander wanted to be on camera speaking to the Israelis, listen to us closely. Like, he's talking to the Israelis. Hear me now. Hear me clearly say this slowly so you'll understand. We are here. We're all around you, and we're ready to fight. Like, the video is produced as part of the battle. They want this to be talked about.
And that seems to me key. Obviously, John, we're showing them here for analysis. We want people to see the full picture of what's happening, and you're providing commentary and analysis. But one imagines also that the motive of the resistance for releasing them is that this must have a, and that's assuming Israeli soldiers are seeing them at some level. I don't know if they circulate among Israeli soldiers or on Telegram or whatever it may be. But to the extent that Israeli soldiers or potential recruits or conscripts may see them, it has to be very demoralizing, in the sense that you know, eyes are always on you, to give the sense that eyes are always on you, no matter how safe you think you are or secure you think you are. The resistance is watching you, it can attack anytime. Has to really have a devastating effect on morale.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably why they want to, you know, call up people from, you know, the US and Canada and around Europe to go and fight. Fight that.
Which they already do, Nora. You know,
for
years and years and years. We know that, and of course,
there's 20,000 Americans in the IDF.
Yeah, how many French, how many British, how many Canadians too?
And what John said, the reason they're focusing on the United States and France to recruit soldiers from the Jewish community is because those two countries have the largest Jewish communities outside Israel, the US and France. But they also recruit from South Africa, from Canada, from the UK. And this has, you know, a few years ago, before the genocide, this is some years ago, we reported on it, they even held or scheduled a recruitment event for the Israeli army at the Paris Grand Synagogue. And there was uproar about that. And then I think it was canceled, or at least public notice of it was removed, because what they're also doing with that is reinforcing this idea that Jewish communities are loyal to Israel, and that there's no difference between being Jewish and being Israeli, and even being an Israeli soldier. So this strategy of deliberately recruiting, you know, they're not just waiting for volunteers to show up. They're saying, we're going to go out and recruit in Jewish communities as part of the Israeli government or Israeli military strategy, is also a sure way to foster anti-Jewish sentiment and anti-Semitism by reinforcing the Zionist idea that to be Jewish is to support the brutal colonization of Palestine and now the genocide of its people.
Right.
Yeah, the information operations of the Qassam brigades are something that will be studied in military schools, like Abu Ubaidah said. I think it's just an obvious point. The way that they have used these videos and what they put in the videos, the little details that they want people to find. And it's part of the reason why it takes so long to put together the resistance report every week, is because it takes hours to go through the videos to see the details that they want you to see and to get them right, and to, you know, and to show them in the way that they're intended to be shown. And those information, I mean, the Israelis do the exact same thing. Every single day, the Israelis produce this, what they consider to be their version of the information operations that Qassam does. They show bombed buildings. They show, you know, they show their
just
troops
obliteration
walking through running. They look like they're running scared, like waddling through battle spaces, shooting out empty windows, spraying their machine guns into open areas. That's what they consider their information operations. It's just that Qassams are so much better and are representing a national liberation struggle that people all over the world are watching. But you see it's blurred. I mean, you can, if you watch, I mean, maybe one day when we do a question answer show, I can show you all the ways that they they do conceal the things that would be useful, because you see them in all the videos, what they don't want to be shown. But they go through multiple layers, right? Like you saw that one video has a 𝐓𝐿 commander. He's standing with his forces. So he's saying this is the scene. And then it goes to editing. They'll say, block out that. Sometimes you'll see, for example, the drone footage blocked out because it might indicate what type of drone it was. And they don't want that for scrambling, to scramble the signals and whatnot. But lots of times you'll see there's all kinds of little details in there that they clearly wanted to suggest and to be in that picture. Like I always point out the telephones, because that secure line is a thumb in the eye of the Israelis who tried to invade secretly Gaza in 2018 and cut that tap that connection, and they failed to do it. And now those 685 days into the war, those channels still are how the resistance communicates with their spotters, with their fighters, with the fighters in the tunnel, how they coordinate above and below ground operations. So it's very sophisticated resistance that we're watching. It puts lie to everything that we read in the Western media about, even from the experts, saying that they're just a small band of guerrillas running around harassing. That's all they can do is, that's what the Israelis say, that the resistance is not defeated, but they are, smaller bands running around harassing. And these videos show that it's the opposite, that it's the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 battalion waiting in their position. They haven't fought in more than 10 months. And that first video I showed you, they come and they hit the ground running at 100% capacity and execution. It's a remarkable part of this story.
And I think as well that the main audience for these videos, Ali talked a little earlier about them sending a message to the Israelis, and I think that's true. But obviously, the main audience is their own people, is the Palestinians and the Arab world, to show that the resistance is still fighting. After nearly 2 years, they're still fighting. And not
they're
only
still producing weapons.
They're still producing weapons, and they're still producing videos. And these highly sophisticated military communiques. The modern, in the days of PLO resistance, it was. It was communiques, written communiques, which often went out over radio. But this is visual confirmation that this is actually happening, that these resistance operations are actually happening, and that is, a message to the Palestinian people, a message to the Arab world first and foremost, I think.
That's such a good point, Asa, because it really puts into perspective these statements we get day after day from Arab leaders and from Western leaders. We had another one yesterday from Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, saying, the way to end the war is a ceasefire. He didn't say Israel must stop the genocide right away. He implied it has to be agreed, or more or less on Israel's conditions. And he explicitly said Hamas handing over its weapons.
Right.
Who's going to go and take Hamas's weapons from them? If the Israeli army can't do it, is the French army going to go and do it? Who's going to go do it? Nobody's going to go.
Palestinian Authority, right?
He says that we need to see the Palestinian Authority back in Gaza. So basically, the president of France saying the resistance must surrender to the genocidal state, and we must put in place a collaborationist, Vichy-style Palestinian Authority force. Well, they can say that till the cows come home, but someone's going to make the resistance give up their weapons, and they're not going to. And not because they're stubborn or bloody-minded or they don't want an end to this, but because they know that giving up their weapons ensures the final solution. Imagine if the resistance said, okay, we're going to release all the prisoners of war, and we're going to go out into the middle of Gaza City and place all our weapons out in the open so Israel can bomb them.
And that it's not actually possible to surrender to Israel. Netanyahu has repeatedly said.
You can't surrender. Israel doesn't accept surrender. The Syria, the Lebanon surrendered to Israel, not the resistance, the government. The government surrendered to Israel in the agreement, and in the recent statements of the Prime Minister Nawaf Islam, and they said the resistance has to disarm, and the army, the Lebanese army, has to go and disarm the resistance as if that's possible. Is Israel satisfied? No. They continue to occupy Lebanon, to bomb Lebanon, to murder Lebanese people. The new dictatorship in Syria, installed by the Americans and the Turks and the Qataris with Israeli support, surrendered to Israel, and Israel keeps bombing Syria. So you can't even surrender to Israel. So, of course, the big precedent here, we know, and people have to be reminded of this history because Palestinians don't forget it. In 1982, when the Israelis were besieging Beirut, and they said, the Israelis said, we want the PLO to disarm. And the Americans came in and they brokered an agreement. The American envoy, Philip Habib, brokered an agreement that if the PLO disarms and leaves, if the fighters leave, the Palestinian civilian population in the refugee camps will be safe. And that's what happened. The PLO left on ships, and a multinational force came in with the French and the Italians and the Americans and whoever else. And those who are old enough will remember the famous images of the PLO fighters and Yasser Arafat evacuating Beirut on ships as part of the US brokered guaranteed agreement. And then what happened immediately after? The massacres in Sabra and Shatila, the massacres of Palestinian refugees. So that's what happens when you surrender to Israel. That's what happens when you disarm. So if the resistance disarmed, what would happen is Israel would immediately implement its plan to take over all of Gaza and expel the population, because now there would be no resistance to stop them. That's what would happen.
And there's never any, equivocal demand of Israel to disarm. There's never.
No one is calling this entity.
Ever.
This entity that is on trial for genocide at the International Court of Justice, this entity whose top leaders are wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court and crimes against humanity. Nobody's calling on them to disarm.
No.
Nobody's calling on them to disarm. This is like calling, and this is an exact analogy, and, I can be reported to the IHRA or whoever it is who's policing us. This is like asking the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto to disarm in front of the Nazis.
Yeah.
That's what it is. The Warsaw Ghetto was defeated, but their resistance is still celebrated to this day. I mean, the Nazis murdered who they murdered. The Warsaw Ghetto didn't defeat the Nazi regime, but they fought for their lives. And that's why survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising identified with and praised the Palestinian resistance after the war, because they associated themselves and their experience with the wars with the Palestinian resistance. So for Emmanuel Macron, anyone else, to call on the Palestinian resistance to disarm in front of this genocidal Holocaust perpetrating state would be exactly the same as going back in time and calling on the Jewish resistance to the Nazis to disarm. And of course, that's what the French did, because there was a collaborationist government in Vichy, and the government in Paris today of Emmanuel Macron is not the political and spiritual descendant of Charles de Gaulle. It is the descendant of the Vichy regime of Marshal Pétain, and that's exactly what all of the European Union is today. They are Vichy Pétainists who want to collaborate with the Nazis against the Jews, which is what they did. Europeans collaborated with the Nazis. Probably the resistance was a minority in Europe, and the majority were collaborators.
Well said. Thank you for that, Ali. Let's take a look at the website. This week, was just hard. It was a very difficult week for our contributors in Gaza, and just that one feature that I read in the news report, "I Envy My Dead Best Friend," by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐧𝐢𝐜 I think really kind of epitomizes the psychological state that our friends and
It's a
contributors are
very
in.
difficult
Yeah.
piece, a very moving piece. And Mohammed Hammo is, of course, a contributor to the Electronic Intifada, one of 4 we know of who have been murdered in this genocide. And we continue to honor his memory. And to Khalid al-Qirshali, we send you love. We want you to continue as you do. You continue to write, you continue to tell these stories. And we didn't get to meet Mohammed Hammo, but I'm looking forward to meeting you, Khalid, and to embracing you. And there is life ahead for Palestine after this genocide. This is not just day 685 of this genocide. It's day 685 of the process of demise of this murderous Zionist regime.
Exactly. Thank you for reminding us of that, Ali. And what did Omar say? Compounding resilience. That's a kind of apt phrase right now, as we scroll through, the text messages and the emails and the phone calls that we get from our friends and colleagues in Gaza, as we read the testimonies of our contributors at Electronic
And I just want to
Intifada.
point out the piece, the memorial to Joanne Lingle, written by the scholar Edward Curtis. Some of our viewers knew Joanne, and she was a member of the Christian Peacemaker team in the West Bank for some time. She was a lifelong activist for justice in Palestine and for justice for so many people around the world. She went to prison for her beliefs a number of times, and she died a few months ago. And Edward Curtis wrote this piece to highlight her, but also to make the point that so many people, including faithful Christians like Joanne, work silently away from the limelight in this global struggle for justice, this global solidarity movement. And Joanne was also, for 20 years, supported the work of the Electronic Intifada. And so it was just really wonderful that this piece came to us from Edward Curtis unsolicited. And I knew a little about Joanne, but I learned so much more about her from this piece. And it put in perspective for me her own commitment to this cause, but also of so many people like her who may never be known, whose names will never be carved in stone, let's say. And so this piece is really, it honors Joanne Lingle, but it's also a way of honoring so many people who have worked and are working in solidarity with Palestinians. So it's a really beautiful and moving piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Please go to electronicintifada.net to read all of our features and our analysis pieces, our reports. There are some standalone podcast interviews that we have up on the Electronic Intifada YouTube, so please go check those out. Next week, we won't have a live stream show, but our publication is going to be working normally. We are still going to be publishing other podcast episodes on our YouTube and all of our platforms, so stay tuned for those.
So we'll be off, Nora.
Yeah.
I mean, the show will not be,
Yeah.
the show will not, the live stream will not be on next week. But as you said, the Electronic Intifada will still be working.
We're not
People
going
can
anywhere.
find new material published every day at electronicintifada.net. But we will not be on the live stream on August 28th, and we will be back on September 4th. Is that
That's
right?
right. I think
Yeah.
that's the right. Yes.
Yes, September 4th.
Yeah. And Ali, did you have people that you wanted to thank for their continuing
Always.
support?
I want to thank each and every person, but I'm just going to name a few. Just know we love and appreciate all of you for everything you do, all the ways you support our work, including by helping us to finance this work, because we're completely independent. That's why we can do the kind of reporting we do and continue to report from Gaza and around the world. So I just want to say thank you to Nermeen, Paul, Catherine, Anna, Jennifer, Socorro, Caitlin, Teresa, Anna, Emmett, Joseph, Faisal, Farana, Christine, Zainab, John, and Mark. That's just a few of the wonderful people who are part of our community and help us do this work every day.
Thank you. And of course, big thanks to Tamara Nassar behind the scenes for directing and producing this program, Michael F. Brown for fact-checking, Ellie Gerzon for social media, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, on behalf of myself and John and Ali, Asa and Tamara, thank you all, and we will see you September 4th.